The protagonist remembered the day his family was killed by monsters, and he was left an orphan. But he vowed to become an adventurer who destroys such monsters. In the world of the protagonist, one can gain a skill, a power that was granted by the gods to fight monsters, and usually manifested itself at the age of 12. The adventurer's task is to reach rank C and fight monsters to protect innocent villagers. In such a case, the heroes are given glory and honor, which of course, everyone wanted, including our hero, when he looked at such people. The hero often prayed and asked to be granted strength and was even willing to accept strange ones, as long as he could protect others. But when he received his skill and could not understand its meaning, he ran to the abbot to ask for help. The boy ran to the abbot with hope, childishly rejoicing at the acquired skill and wanting to show it to his elders as soon as possible. But the abbot only needed one glance to understand that the boy Chrome's skill was the most useless, and he would not become an adventurer, which he reported. Many years later, a team of 3 adventurers entered the cave, and the one trailing behind them was Chrome, who was being urged on by the swordsman. In response to Ash's reproaches, the hero had to humbly agree and naturally increase his pace, and Ash continued to be indignant at the swordsman's sluggishness, because the inept Chrome had been hired specifically, and now the swordsman demanded to be at least a little useful. For adventurers, a skill is akin to a weapon, and for our hero, the skill was a one-time resurrection, allowing the hero to return to life only once. And although Chrome did not become an adventurer, he actively works with them and accompanies other, stronger adventurers, and is proud of his role as an errand boy. Meanwhile, the swordsman and his partner discussed how Chrome was abandoned by his own sister, because she had enormous magical potential. Suddenly, a monster attacked the group of adventurers, but Ash managed to notice it and turn to face it. Therefore, he immediately raised his sword and activated his fire ability, defending himself and attacking the enemy. Ash's partner had super strength and could easily lift a multi-ton sledgehammer, so he helped finish off the monster easily. While the boys were rejoicing over their new experience points and bragging about their talents, Chrome was tasked with collecting the loot. While Chrome was collecting the spoils in the form of red crystals, the adventurers turned into the wrong corridor of the cave, and the hero hastened to remind them that they could get lost and might not return. But Ash considered himself a leader, and in general, a person who could not be ordered or contradicted, so he immediately shut the hero up, reminding him of his status. However, not only did Ash enter the wrong cave, he also screamed so loudly that he woke up the cannibals that lived there and covered the entire ceiling. Although Ash was brave enough to say that they were inferior monsters, in the process of resistance he realized that there were too many of them, and that the 2 of them could not defeat them. Chrome, not having any skill, saved himself as best he could, covering himself with a large backpack like a shield, and fighting back with his weak sword. The guy understood that he had a low level and was powerless even against such monsters. And it was at that moment that he felt something hit him in the back. Unfortunately for him, Chrome was standing too close to the ravine, so when he lost his balance, he started to fall into it, but grabbed the edge. But the adventurers weren't going to help him. They pushed the hero to distract the monsters onto Chrome, and now they were running away, mocking the victim. Already falling into the gorge to the cannibals, Chrome understood that his ability would not work, because even if he was resurrected, he would die immediately without help, which is what happened. Only after some time, Chrome woke up and realized that he was still alive, and his skill worked. But then he noticed that it turned the hero into a skeleton. Looking at himself, the hero did not understand why he looked like that, but noted that he was voiceless, and then went to his skill panel. There it turned out that he had now become a lich, a soul that was reborn with evil magic, a fairly strong body, but weak in attack, and most importantly brainless. But there was a miscalculation in the system. The hero was aware of himself, he was not stupid. And besides, with such a body, he was now invulnerable and became one of the monsters of the dungeon. But the body, although according to the system it was strong, was useless as if dead. So out of despair, the hero fell to the ground. The hero's life was not easy. He wanted to serve his country even when he was weak. But he was betrayed, and now the hero believed that his sister, who told him about his weakness, was right. But Chrome was not ready to accept the statement that only those who were lucky with skills could become adventurers, although he acknowledged his loyalty. The thing is that monsters have evolution, and the higher the level, the stronger they become, and the hero wanted to use this to his advantage. Chrome knew that monsters even change their appearance with evolution, so he hoped not only to become the strongest adventurer, but also to gain a human form. Although the hero had already come up with a dream for himself, he was puzzled whether the liches would be able to go through such a path, since they are the weakest monsters. But thanks to the fact that the hero had some ingenuity, he came up with the idea of pretending to be an ordinary skeleton, and other monsters passed him by. Although Chrome knew this dungeon, he had not entered its far corners, so he used this opportunity to gather more information about the area. The hero came across a small goblin with a club, but nevertheless superior to Chrome in level and strength. So the hero came up with a trick with a distraction, tearing off part of his arm, which distracted the goblin onto himself. And Chrome himself attacked the goblin from behind with a sword, quickly and sharply. In one blow, the hero managed to put the enemy down, after which the skill panel showed that killing the goblin gave only 3 miserable points. But Chrome's level quickly increased. Killing an enemy of a higher level inspired Chrome greatly. Now he was confident that as long as he was able to reason and think, even in his situation, he would be able to rise. To level up, Chrome needed to get a couple more points, and the hero was determined to achieve his goals and grow. So Chrome went to wander around the dungeon destroying monsters and came across a huge slime, but weak. So Chrome didn't even have to think of anything, and he cut the monster down in one swing and received only 1 point. With this move, the strategy of pretending to be dead will soon be ineffective, and if he continues to beat the weak, it will take years to level up. Chrome sat down by the wall. The lack of hunger and fatigue was a big plus for the body, but the hero himself wanted to sleep, so that at least something of the human would remain in him. Without falling asleep, the hero thought that without the sun, he had completely lost track of time, and did not know how long he had been in the caves, and he also wondered if his sister was worried about him. Because of work, he could not come home for several days, and Carmen did not care. But now he hoped for her indifference, although he drove these thoughts away from himself. Deciding not to think about what would plunge him into depression, Chrome went hunting, and the first monster we encountered was a werewolf with red eyes. Red Eye was strong. The hero would probably even be given several levels for it. But the monster exceeds Chrome in strength and speed. But Chrome decided to push his doubts away and remembered that, unlike many monsters, he was able to think and could use tricks. Chrome decided that since the monster mistook him for dead and showed no interest, the hero could study the enemy's habits by observing him. Chrome entered the monster's territory and, placing his backpack opposite, waited for the monster, who, upon entering his lair, was surprised by the new items. And then, when the monster was distracted by the backpack, Chrome swung his sword and attacked from behind, so much so that the monster howled like a monster. Chrome cut the monster, but was glad that the plan had worked. But when attacking the hefty monster, the hero lost his balance and fell with him from another cliff. But even after falling from a great height, the monster continued to attack Chrome, and a fight began between the undead. The werewolf injured the skeleton's arm, but Chrome didn't feel any pain. He only regretted that it would now be more difficult to fight back. But the feeling of victory was more pleasant. The skill panel announced that for killing the Red Eye, Chrome received 11 experience points, and now his level has been increased to the maximum of 5. The hero looked into the lake and was glad that his strange body was the reason for his victory. And he also somehow instinctively felt what was necessary for evolution. And at this time, evolution began, which healed all the cracks and chips in his skeleton, grew back his lost arm and something like skin. Chrome looked at his reflection in the lake, and the system announced that he was now a ghoul and belonged to the demons, with a huge potential for regeneration. Chrome knew that ghouls were small with elongated features, and were closer to human form than skeletons, so he was happy. Finally, he noted that his hand was intact, and his parameters, according to the skill system, had become much higher. Chrome was happy with his first useful regeneration skill, and was inspired to level up again to evolve. Chrome went hunting for the next monster and found a mouse monster. Even though it was big, their level was equal, so Chrome was confident of his victory. It was only when he entered the battle that Chrome noticed the first inconvenience of his body, and that was his long nails, which made it difficult to hold the sword. While Chrome was in the way, the mouse attacked Chrome with its claws in the chest, but the guy was not going to let go of the offender, and falling, threw his sword at her. The mouse was distracted by the weapon. Defending herself from one, she did not notice how Chrome flew behind her back, thanks to the enormous agility of his new body. Then, from behind, Chrome attacked the enemy with his claws, tearing the beast's neck and piercing the skull on both sides. At the same time, not a single nail broke, which spoke of their strength. And Chrome decided that in this body he would kill monsters with his bare hands. For the killed mouse, the skill panel showed an increase of 7 points, and an increase in level to the 5th. But Chrome now understood that evolution would take a longer path than in his previous body. And at this time, the regeneration skill began to work, and all the wounds on the body quickly healed, including the pierced chest. Chrome admitted that being a ghoul was better than nothing, but it turned out that this body was hungry. Having torn off the mouse's leg, he at first doubted whether to eat it, because it seemed to him that he was losing his humanity. But then he thought that the need for food is a sign of being alive, which means he is closer to a human. A couple of days later, Chrome came across an orc with a level twice that of the hero, but using a trick, the hero pierced the orc's head with his claws and killed him. For defeating an enemy that was twice as strong, Chrome received 33 points and increased his level to 14. Over the last few days, Chrome had appreciated the level of regeneration, with which he no longer had to plan battle tactics. Everything healed very quickly. Chrome just didn't understand why he still didn't feel tired and attributed it to a racial characteristic. To think about his Chrome for a while, he sat down by the wall of the cave. Now he was far from his human form, but became stronger than in his past life. And he also remembered his sister, with whom he used to be incredibly close. But over the past few years the connection was lost due to her improvement and, on the contrary, Chrome's uselessness. Chrome could only accompany adventurers and earn pennies, but unlike him, Carmen was able to awaken a magical skill and became an adventurer. One day, she rose to the level of C and was going on a new mission. Chrome, seeing her off, praised the girl for her achievements. And in response, Carmen only advised her weakling brother to stay at home and abandon his ridiculous dream of becoming an adventurer. It was very hard to hear about his own talentless existence, but hearing it from his own sister was doubly unpleasant, and even shocked Chrome. Once Carmen got her skill and became better than her brother, she started looking down on Chrome and became distant. Nevertheless, Chrome was interested in whether his sister was worried about him now, but he understood that if he showed up to her like this, she would kill him without thinking. In addition, if he couldn't speak at all as a skeleton, then he wheezed in this one, which sounded even scarier, so the hero decided to practice speaking a little. Chrome went further into the cave and, to his surprise, heard a strange sound in one of the corridors. At first he thought it was a goblin, but then he realized he was wrong. Looking around the corner, Chrome discovered that adventurers had entered the dungeons, and this surprised the ghoul so much that he gasped loudly. The most unpleasant thing in this situation was that his sister was among the adventurers. Although the dungeon was near his hometown, she had not been underground for a long time. All the adventurers were strong, especially since there were 3 of them, so Chrome decided that he had to run before he was noticed. There was a misunderstanding in the group itself, due to the fact that the guy had very little of the healing potion in stock, and Carmen was now scolding. And while the second girl defended the guy, assuring him that it was not critical, especially since Carmen took more than usual, the hero's sister took the treatment much more seriously. Carmen was putting so much pressure on the guy that he decided to remind her that she should be grateful to him for responding to her sudden request. But the girl was not timid, and responded to the boy with a few affectionate words, recalling that the lives of other people depended on them, and they needed to be fully armed. Chrome pressed himself so tightly against the wall that he accidentally knocked over a stone and it fell with an echo, thus giving away the hero's presence. Carmen immediately called upon her magic to help, summoning ice copies that were directed towards the ghoul. The ice spears hit the ghoul's hand, and he hissed from the pain of the cold burn, and by trying to escape, he only revealed himself to the adventurers. But people weren't afraid of Chrome at all. For them, a monster of his level was insignificant. Chrome didn't know what to do, but what scared him most was what his sister had discovered. And while he was thinking about his own, the adventurers were thinking about what to do with the monster. While Lena and Derek were discussing how to attack, Carmen had already given the order to work together. The success of the battle consists of attacking and defending in the correct sequence. While the people were thinking about their own things, Chrome was thinking about how to escape. So far he only knew about the need to distract them, but he didn't have the slightest idea how to do it. The first to rush into battle was the swordsman Derek, with the skill of using fire, who wanted to turn the ghoul into coals with the first blow. Lena used the levitation skill and in an instant of experience found herself behind the ghoul, and then attacked with her sword, but he managed to close. Chrome managed to escape the pincers and stood in front of the enemies. He could not respond to both opponents, but he could not ignore anyone either. Both could destroy him. Derek had already rushed at the ghoul, but he didn't expect that he would throw a stone at him, and so accurately that the swordsman would have to repel the attack with his sword. However, it was a very successful method of distraction, so that Chrome had time to make a rare jump to approach the man and attack. But Chrome didn't expect more. As soon as one of the group fell and the others were distracted by this, the ghoul immediately ran away. It just turned out that the girls were not interested in their friend. Despite his injury, Lena and Carmen immediately rushed to catch up with the ghoul. Lena was the first to approach, and Chrome understood that he wouldn't be able to escape from her. So he stopped abruptly and turned to face his opponent. Thanks to his increased regeneration, Chrome could take a direct attack from a swordswoman with one hand, and the second one he grabbed the sword with his claws and knocked it out of the girl's hands, so much so that the blade shot up to the ceiling of the cave and got stuck there. Seeing that her friend was losing, Carmen decided to join the fight and attacked again with ice copies. A couple of ice flows hit Chrome's legs, so much so that they tore his muscles and broke the bones of his calf and thigh. The hero fell, not having the strength to step on the injured limb. While Lena and Derek praised Carmen and complained that they wanted to do everything themselves, the hero's sister scolded her teammates for their stupidity in conducting the battle. The regeneration had not yet begun to work, but Chrome understood that he had to save himself, so while the people were arguing, he got up on all fours. While Chrome was thinking about his condition and what he could do, he looked around and noticed that the ice flows were not melting, and regeneration took a very long time. While Chrome was biding his time, Carmen walked up to the ghoul and drew her staff, ready to attack again. Although Carmen had grown at a speed that was surprising to her brother, up to level 18, her most powerful trick was the ice trident she was currently summoning. Chrome did nothing. He waited for the right moment to escape, but in such a way as not to harm his sister. But then Chrome remembers that he now has a voice, so even though he is wheezing, he manages to call his sister by name, syllable by syllable, which distracts her. Chrome managed to distract his sister in time, and her trident flew past the hero, almost pinning him to the floor. Derek immediately pounced on the girl for her mistake, not understanding why she missed from close range. While Derek was screaming, Chrome was rejoicing at the small victory. Carmen herself was confused that she recognized her brother's voice in the monster's speech, which in theory was impossible. Finally, Chrome's leg healed and he tried to get to his feet, which Carmen noticed and began to cast a spell. But it was too late. The hero pushed the girl and ran away. The girl fell very painfully on her bottom, and when she opened her eyes, she only saw the enemy's heels shining. However, this was enough to compare the facts of the fight and escape, to understand that this ghoul was intelligent. For another mistake, Derek again bit the girl, indignant at how she could have allowed the monster to escape. But Carmen herself was interested in the fact that the system saw the ghoul as a human corpse resurrected after death and turned into a monster. Chrome himself did not run far from the people, literally stopped around the corner, was able to hide behind a ledge, and began to watch the people. The hero was worried about Carmen's motive for entering the dungeon, although Chrome had previously taken her with him to explore the area. But as soon as his sister raised her level, she stopped descending, and it was now important for Chrome not to run into her and her friends. Therefore, the hero ran to the opposite side of the dungeon, but along the way he thought about the fact that people went to the deepest part of the dungeon, where the concentration of mana was higher. Normal humans are unable to stay in the dungeons for long, as their bodies are different from those of monsters and are unable to withstand the local conditions. For humans, being here is tantamount to a death sentence. The body is quickly exhausted due to the magical pressure in the air. A trip to the dungeon is always a matter of careful planning, and often adventurers take guides with them who know the safer routes. However, Chrome couldn't be a guide for people now. If he came close, his own sister would kill him. Chrome decided to watch the people from afar for now, just in case. And in the meantime, Carmen's team came across the corpse of an adventurer. Carmen was the first to stop examining the body, and all three were surprised to see that the corpse had been cleaned out, and even the money had been taken. Just as Carmen suddenly approached the body, she also suddenly stopped being interested in it, and commanded him to move on. However, Lena and Derek were already thinking that it was too dangerous to go down, and it was time for them to retreat. But Carmen is confident that they are well prepared enough to go down further, especially since they planned it. Derek was beginning to dislike Carmen's arrogant behavior, especially since no one had appointed her as a leader, and, in his opinion, she had no right to command. Chrome couldn't believe that people were going to go down lower, because they probably knew that there were more monsters there, and they were more dangerous. The increasing number of monsters and their levels, as well as the concentration of mana, were deadly, and Chrome once again wondered about Carmen's motives. Suddenly, an ogre appeared in front of the people, level 22, which should have been in the depths, but appeared much earlier than its habitat. Carmen was clearly also confused by the appearance of an enemy that exceeded her personal level of 18, but she was with the team she had hoped for. It was precisely such sudden appearances that Chrome was afraid of. Now he was interested in how his sister was going to solve this, but he also thought about how he could help her. Realizing that he couldn't go out to the people yet, that for them he was just a monster, and the team would start to panic at the sight of him, Chrome decided to watch. And the panic in the team had already been caused by Derek, who was afraid of the ogre's level. But Carmen, as an experienced one, assured that by working together they could win. But Derek wasn't sure that they could defeat the monster, but they couldn't run either. They would be caught and killed. Then Derek decides to use the fire coating of his blade and damage the monster, but the ogre is faster and knocks the guy off his feet with a club. Lena moved out of the line of attack with her levitation and tried to get behind the enemy again for a surprise attack. However, the ogre noticed her and immediately swung the bat in her direction and knocked the girl off her feet, which surprised her. Carmen also decided to intervene in the battle, again calling for ice arrows, one of which the ogre blocked with a bat. But the second one hit him in the side, but for him it was like a splinter. The monster quickly and easily pulled it out and then crushed it. Chrome assessed the situation and found the team strong, but unable to work as a team. So he did not understand his sister's choice in people. Carmen decided to use her most powerful spell, but it had a short range and was easy to dodge, so she needed the help of her partners. While Derek was thinking that they didn't have enough strength to defeat the ogre, and thought that they would all die, Carmen demanded that they distract the monster while she cast a spell. Carmen's belief in victory seemed like nonsense to the guy, and her skill, although excellent, seemed useless to him now. Derek decided to run away, but he couldn't do it right now. He understood that the monster would catch him, so he came up with a plan and persuaded Lena. Chrome noticed the guy's strange behavior, but he didn't understand what it meant. All he could do was watch. The ogre decided to act again and attacked the people, lowering his heavy bat into the place where the team of people stood. While the ogre was chasing Lena and Derek, Carmen began to cast a spell. Although the distance to the target was still far, she understood that this was the limit of what her comrades could give her. As soon as Carmen marked herself on the field with the ice trident summoning pentagram, Derek commanded Lena, and picking him up, they ran. Carmen immediately realized that without the help of her friends, she had become an obvious target, and Lena, flying away and mocking the magician, only advised him not to get distracted. Realizing that she had been abandoned but that there was no turning back, Carmen continued to cast her spell, only using more energy to finish the trident's summoning faster. Karma had already summoned her trident, but because the ogre had swung to strike, the ice weapon only hit the monster's left arm and cut it off. But even such a wound did not stop the monster, and the raised bat fell on the girl, knocking her off her feet. And the ogre began to scream. He was in pain, and at the same time he was mocking the prey that he was ready to finish off. Chrome, noticing that his sister was hurt and unable to get to her feet to run, ran out of hiding and ran towards her. Derek and Lena also saw what happened, but the guy refused to accept it as his fault. He was sure that Carmen herself was to blame for deciding to go so far. And finally the guy shouted that she was a fool to believe that her brother was still alive in the dungeon. And for Chrome, the statement that his sister was looking for him was a big shock. Carmen was badly hurt by the blow, and as she was losing consciousness, she thought about her brother and scolded him for being so weak and going to such a dangerous place. But she hoped that he had more luck. The ogre again swung at his victim, and when he had almost reached his target, his attack was repelled by Chrome, protecting his sister. Chrome felt embarrassed in front of his sister that because of him, a weakling, she came to such a dangerous place. So he was determined to protect her. A new enemy appeared in front of the ogre, but even he found it funny that his level 22 opponent was a level 14 ghoul. But then the ogre decided to act and lowered his club onto the ghoul. But Chrome managed to jump to the side and dodged all of the enemy's moves. And then he decided to attack in response, because this was the only way he could save himself and his sister, while he had time to assess the enemy's potential and think through tactics. Chrome's new body had claws that made it difficult to hold a sword, but they were a good weapon in themselves and even cut an ogre. As he retreated, Chrome snatched an ice arrow from the ground that his sister had shot earlier and threw it straight at the ogre's head. But the monster did not receive any injury. It only swung the bat in response and broke Chrome's arm, which he used to defend himself. Chrome tried to attack the ogre from the side of the severed arm, hoping to harm the enemy, but nothing worked. Even without one arm, the ogre was still stronger than Chrome and wouldn't let him get to his blind spot, so he had to quickly come up with another plan. Chrome noticed that it was hard for the ogre to move with only one arm, and since the hero was more agile, the ogre's attacks were less effective, and one could try to wear down the enemy. Chrome understood that his stamina was not eternal either, but for now it was the only factor he could counter, so he continued to dodge the blows. Eventually, the ogre lost his patience and decided to use his fangs, the only weapon he had left, and Chrome was waiting for this. Chrome deliberately exposed himself and went into a frontal attack on the ogre, allowing the tom to bite off his arm, while piercing a couple of the ogre's fangs. By sacrificing his left arm, Chrome hoped to deal the fatal blow to the ogre from within, something the ogre was not yet aware of. Even when Carmen's team tried to attack the ogre, Chrome noticed that his skin was very strong, which meant that it was best to wound from the inside. The plan worked. With the severed arm, Chrome managed to damage the ogre's throat from the inside and he died, for which the hero received a large portion of points and increased his level to 18. At the same time, regeneration began and the lost arm was restored, which became an amazing discovery for the hero. Carmen was unconscious the whole time and didn't know what happened, and the ghoul froze, thinking about what to do next. Having loaded his sister onto his back, Chrome carried her to the surface, thinking how worried he was about his sister and how useless he had been all this time. But on the way, Chrome thought about how to carry his sister out without being seen by people. He didn't want to leave his sister unconscious in front of strangers. And on the way he found a sword, which he recognized as the one he had thrown away and decided to take with him. Two adventurers were walking through the dungeon and froze when they heard a strange loud sound nearby. And when the guys turned around, they saw the ghoul trying to attack the girl lying unconscious on the ground. Immediately, insults and long arrows flew at Chrome, from which he fled, leaving his sister in the care of people. At that moment, Carmen came to her senses from the loud screams and did not understand how she ended up in this part of the dungeon, and who the adventurers were. Carmen didn't understand what the guys in front of her were saying, nor did she understand where the ogre had gone or how she had ended up in this place. However, Carmen remembered that she was carried on her back. Only her brother did that. But logic told her that it was impossible. One of the guys points to the sword in the girl's hands, which she had not noticed, and she sees that it is her brother's blade. There was also a signature on the sword from her brother asking her to wait for him, which touched Carmen and she began to cry, pressing the blade to herself. Chrome had run away as soon as he handed his sister over to the humans, but now he was much more inspired to raise his level so that he could quickly gain a human form. Wandering through the dungeon, Chrome destroyed monsters, and this time made his target the man-eating monsters who ate him. Since the new body required food, the hero decided to try to eat the captured monsters, but they tasted no better than rot. The tentacles were like rubber, the thick skin was like metal, and the insides were rotten. Meanwhile, Chrome was thinking that there was not much time left until the next evolution, and he was wondering how much more humane he would become, and whether he would be able to come out to people in his new form. However, there was also a sad thing about the new evolution, since the subsequent evolution would take longer than the previous ones. If you kill low-level monsters, then you can't even dream of quickly leveling up, and higher-level monsters are dangerous because they can kill. In order to have a quiet snack and rest, Chrome went into an area where there were no monsters, but now someone was approaching him from behind with a sword. It was a level 21 gargoyle. It mistook the dead ogre next to the hero for alive and attacked, which allowed Chrome to notice the new threat. Then the gargoyle rushed towards the ghoul, and the latter, warned, was now able to begin retreating, not understanding how a monster higher than level 20 got to this level. However, the gargoyle did not give the hero time to think. It turned out that it could breathe fire and was now burning Chrome with it. And then, through her own flame, which she distracted the hero with, she attacked him with a sword, and as soon as Chrome managed to dodge, she hit him with her free hand. Chrome was cornered and didn't know what to do. The enemy was blinding him with flames and burning him, attacking him with a sword and at the same time flying without making a single sound. Although Chrome managed to defeat an ogre of a higher level than himself, he understood that he could not be lucky forever, so he decided to run away and not risk his life. However, the gargoyle turned out to be incredibly fast and caught up with him in a matter of seconds. But Chrome decided to act unexpectedly, and turning sharply, attacked the winged creature. But there wasn't even a scratch left on the gargoyle. On the contrary, she wounded Chrome in return, and he had to flee again. Only Chrome didn't really pay attention to the road and went to the edge, but he had already figured out how to use this to his advantage. Chrome froze at the edge of the abyss. The gargoyle attacked with flames again, and then went on a frontal attack, but miscalculated and flew off the cliff. Chrome had once seen a fight with such opponents, so now he decided to use this method and jump on the falling gargoyle from above. And as soon as he attacked her from behind, he began to tear her with his claws and bite her with his teeth. And as soon as they approached the ground, Chrome grabbed the gargoyle's head so that he could hit it harder when it hit the ground. And so Chrome won again, receiving a large number of points, and increased his level to 20, remembering that only with ingenuity he can take on enemies of a higher level. At that moment, the hero remembered that evolution should come with the new level, and hurried to the stream to immediately see what he would turn into. Praying to become more human-like in appearance, Chrome activated evolution, rejoicing as he felt himself becoming stronger. But the new stage of evolution was not just not similar to human, it was strange and called mimic, but now he was a C rank. Even before seeing his reflection, Chrome replied that he had grown a lot in height, and that his arms had become noticeably longer. And on his face there was a strange mask, which no matter how hard he tried to remove he couldn't. It was part of his head, and made him look even more like a monster. Chrome had heard that evolution in monsters brought them closer to the power they needed. But apparently Chrome's desire to be more human was ignored by evolution. Mimics are characterized by the fact that they imitate people, but also attack them. And if someone managed to see the essence hidden behind the mask, mimic, then they will definitely die. What was more interesting about Chrome were the increased characteristics and the new transformation skill. Hoping that at least it would help him become more human-like, Chrome decided to try out the transformation. Even during the transformation, Chrome noticed that the mask had shifted, and when he looked at his reflection in the stream, he was amazed to see a familiar face. The voice, although hoarse from unfamiliarity, was clearly usable. So the hero was glad that a little more, and he would be able to transform into a person better. However, after a couple of minutes, Chrome noticed that being in this form required strength. 1 unit of mana for 10 minutes of the form. The maximum mana reserve will last no more than 4 hours, which means you can't dream about going to the city for now. However, this disadvantage motivated the hero to raise his level and increase his mana limit. Chrome was not going to be discouraged. Suddenly the walls of the dungeon cracked, shook, and there was a deafening roar. Chrome fell to his knees, and then boulders began to fall, and Chrome miraculously dodged one of them and froze, looking around, waiting for the next rockfall. However, as abruptly as everything began, it all ended just as abruptly. Chrome, from experience, immediately thought about the overpopulation of monsters. Rumor has it that deep within this dungeon, the remains of a huge monster are preserved, and the space created by the evil mana of this monster is the dungeon. An abnormal phenomenon occurs in dungeons that have not been cleared by adventurers for a long time. This is called overpopulation. But now this explained why the ogre and gargoyle, being C-rank monsters, had changed their usual habitat. Chrome continued to think about what was happening in the dungeon, confident that this was only the beginning, but his thoughts were interrupted by a new gargoyle. The gargoyle immediately attacked Chrome with its sword, but he dodged and picked up a boulder from the ground, intending to knock the blade out of the gargoyle's hands. Chrome stepped back to swing harder and threw the boulder straight at his opponent's head. But because Chrome maintained his human form, quickly ran out of breath and the blow was weak, the gargoyle immediately released flames. Chrome already knew the general tactics of the gargoyles, so he turned into a mimic, and when the gargoyle with a sword through the flames went on the attack, he hit it on the head. Then he mounted the monster and began to scratch it with his claws. With the last blow, the hero cut off the gargoyle's head. As soon as the monster's severed head fell to the ground, Chrome was awarded 90 points for killing the enemy. Chrome was slightly damaged during the fire attack, so he was glad that his regeneration skill was preserved and his hands were restored. While Chrome was thinking about how quickly he dealt with the gargoyle and how he was no longer afraid to go down into the dungeon, a crowd of gargoyles appeared in front of him. Realizing the enemy's numerical advantage, Chrome rushed to flee, admitting that he had been hasty and rejoicing at his new endurance. Chrome hid again, behind a large boulder. He waited until the gargoyles flew past. It was not advantageous to engage in battle now. The monsters began to change their usual habitat, and their level increased greatly. Something terrible and unusual was happening in this dungeon. Chrome went out to hunt monsters again, and now he was much more active in using his powerful claws, which easily repelled even the blows of gargoyles' swords. But the hero was puzzled that he was still in a dungeon at the D-rank level. But now C-rank monsters were appearing here more and more often. Chrome was sure that the problem was in the overpopulation of monsters, and the first signs were long before the ogre appeared. And if things continue like this, the monsters will emerge to the surface and terrorize the surrounding lands. Chrome was even afraid to imagine how many innocent victims there would be, and the only way to avoid this was to defeat the main boss of the dungeon. And again, Chrome was caught off guard. At the last minute the hero heard footsteps, only managed to make out that these were people walking and hid behind a boulder. It was the level 20 adventurer swordsman Frank, who also discussed the behavior of monsters and was sure that there was an overpopulation of monsters. His partner, level 19 archer Guido, was sure that in such a case they needed to return to the guild and inform the elder. And then there was the level 18 swordswoman Shelley, who believed that they should deal with the boss themselves and prevent a catastrophe. Chrome had to bend over a lot to hide completely, and he thought that it was time for him to get out of there before people noticed him. Guido tried to dissuade his friends from the idea of heroism. It seemed madness to him to go after the dungeon boss with 3 of them. However, Frank did not want to waste time returning to the guild, because at that time the numbers could get out of control. But Guido was much more objective and tried to explain that due to overpopulation, the level of monsters had increased, and, without any information about the local boss, going to him was stupid. But Frank was clearly thinking about making money, about how their team would be the first to bring the material from the boss and sell it at a high price. But Frank only wanted to appear superficial. In reality, he was thinking about the victims and how this would lead to economic decline, unemployment, and hunger. And Chrome listened to the man from behind the stone and involuntarily remembered his hometown, which was also destroyed by monsters. That's why Guido insisted on reporting the overpopulation as soon as possible. and Frank decided to ask for help from Shelley, whose hometown also suffered from overpopulation. Without waiting for words in support of his decision, Frank continued to agitate Guido, assuring him that the adventurers were risking their lives. But if they left, they were risking the lives of many more people. Suddenly, Guido noticed a strange movement to the side and immediately fired an arrow towards the cobblestone, almost hitting the hero. The archer had the skill of the god's eye, which noticed strangers, and now reacted, assuring that someone was hiding nearby. Frank trusted Guido, despite their differences of opinion, so he immediately gave the order to be ready to attack. While Frank counted to 3 to attack, Chrome used that time to transform and approach the adventurers in human form. Frank, although he greeted his new acquaintance, did not lower his sword. Guido also held an arrow and a bow, ready to use them at any moment. Trying to remove suspicion from himself, Chrome tried to lie, explaining that he hid, mistaking them for bandits. Frank lowered his sword, but Guido still had doubts. Chrome's voice seemed too nervous to him, and his loneliness in the dungeon was illogical. Frank was thinking about the stranger's appearance, not yet understanding how to interpret them, but he knew for sure that he was an unusual adventurer. At that moment, Chrome himself was thinking that his plan had failed. Even the appearance of a man did not help convince other people. Everything was more complicated than he thought. Each of the guys had his own thoughts, but none of them were going to trust the other side. Frank decided that he would be able to smooth over the awkwardness of the situation and tried to reassure the stranger that Guido was simply a very rude person and his questions should not be paid attention to. Meanwhile, Frank himself examined Chrome's body and noted that despite his torn clothes, there was not a scratch on his body, which meant the guy had some interesting skill. Following this, the swordsman noted from the same clothes that the guy had clearly been in the dungeon for several days, and without a team or weapon, and began to lean toward Guido's skepticism. Chrome understood that Guido had not yet asked all of his questions, and the more he had to lie, the faster he would get lost in his own lies and be attacked. Both sides did not trust each other, did not know what to do, but did not want to attack. But fortunately for them, a girl was involved in the matter. Shelley, unlike her comrades, was simple-minded and naive. She sympathized with the stranger, and began to scold him for walking alone in the dungeon during a period of overcrowding. Guido immediately reacted and told his friend to move away from Chrome, but the hero was also taken aback by the girl's kindness. He was struck by her conviction that there were no absolutely bad people, especially since she believed that bad people could be seen from afar. Shelley didn't move away from Chrome and started asking him all the questions the guy was thinking about, only she did it without any malicious intent. But the hero became embarrassed. The girl was so kind that she even offered to help the guy get him out of the dungeon. However, Chrome refused and turned sharply and ran away from his new acquaintances, surprising the entire trio. And while the guys finally breathed a sigh of relief that they had avoided an armed conflict, Shelley was sincerely worried about the guy. Guido chided his friend for her gullibility, which was equivalent to stupidity, but the girl simply did not want to judge by appearances. To the swordsman's surprise, Frank joined Guido, explaining that the boy might be a criminal who had escaped from the city. But Shelley, looking after the boy who ran away, was sure that he was not a bad person. Frank thought to himself that the fight in the dungeon was dangerous for both sides, and that Guido had made a big mistake by showing his opponent his true intentions. The situation was dangerous. None of the opposing sides could make the first move, and only the kindness of a friend, in fact, saved everyone. Suspicion and prudence were important qualities of an adventurer, but kindness was no less important. And since the issue with the stranger was resolved by his escape, the group of adventurers had to decide whether to go further or return. The decision was left to Guido. Since Guido supported Frank's ideals and understood Shelley's feelings to some extent, he decided that they were right and they should go to the boss, but suggested that they run away in case of danger. The swordsmen, pleased with Guido's decision, were touched by their friend's thoughts and praised him for the kindness he was hiding. Of the entire team, Shelley was the most positive. The girl assured that their team would be successful. The girl motivated the guys, and she herself thought that she did not want to repeat the tragedy of her city and was ready to save other people at the cost of her life. Chrome ran for a long time. When he had no strength left, he stopped and turned around, thinking that despite all his suspicion, there was no pursuit behind him. He was also very pleased that after so much time he was again treated so attentively and with concern for his life. He was also worried that these adventurers decided to go after the boss, only 3 of them, but he pushed away his worries about strangers. He remembered how Guido kept him at gunpoint the whole time, and he knew that it was better to avoid meeting them again, otherwise he would definitely have to fight. Besides, they came to the dungeon confident in their abilities, unlike him. For them, Chrome would only be a burden. The team of adventurers finally went down and found the boss. The atmosphere around was stifling, but Frank told everyone to hold on. They found a level 30 gargoyle king who was also larger than them and could easily crush them. Shelley saw the monster's skill panel and noted the level was higher than what they expected. But she couldn't afford to back down. Frank decided that he would attack first, and the girl should stick behind him and not expose herself to attack. Frank knew that he couldn't drag out a fight with an opponent whose level was higher than his, so he immediately delivered one of his strongest blows with his blade. To his surprise, the Gargoyle King parried the attack, but the swordsman noted that he had opened up and attacked with a swing from behind his back, but did not leave even a scratch on the enemy. On the contrary, the evil king immediately swung his sword at the girl, and fortunately, she managed to dodge, noting that due to his enormous size, the king was not very fast. The girl noted the blind spot and attacked, ringing along the enemy's side, but immediately realized that she had not caused any damage. Then Guido attacked the king. The arrow cut through the air with a ringing sound and hit the enemy's shoulder, but shattered as if it had hit a stone. The adventurer's abilities were useless against the big guy in front of them with a high defense stat, albeit a low speed. While Frank was assessing the team's chances and thinking of a plan, the king attacked him, but the swordsman managed to hold back the blow. But the king had potential for magic, and for the adventurers this was a big unpleasant surprise. The Gargoyle King also summoned fire, but not some cheap flame, but a roar of fire that surrounded the monster and protected it from enemies. Since this ability was news to people, the swordsman did not have time to jump away from the fire, and his hands were injured. He also examined the girl and was glad that she was not hurt, but she had noticeably lost her confidence. Since Frank, as a leader, could not afford to lose heart, he immediately attacked the king again with a cutting wave, and then he jumped up and over the king to use his most powerful decapitation skill. And after that he immediately commanded Guido to shoot, for which he received a scolding from the archer for recklessness. Guido, without Frank telling him about the new tactics, also understood that he had to shoot at the eyes, so his arrow accurately entered the mucous membrane of the eye on the monster's belly. As soon as Frank landed, he immediately rushed to attack, hoping to deliver a decisive blow to the enemy. But the king turned out to be more agile. The Gargoyle King not only parried the attack, but also dealt a critical blow to the man, causing Frank to fall unconscious. Although Guido shouted at Shelley to run, the girl refused to retreat, now as if seeing her friend's body gave her a new incentive to stand up to the enemy. Although Guido grumbled at his friend's gloominess, he shared her desire to save Frank and defeat the gargoyle, but even together they couldn't scratch the gargoyle. But the king had beaten them up pretty badly, and Shelley was only able to hold on by leaning on her sword. Since the girl hadn't stopped Frank from this reckless attack, she now felt obligated not to leave him here to die. The girl apologized to Guido, feeling guilty before him as well. But the archer did not consider the girl guilty. On the contrary, he begged her to run while she had the strength. Guido could no longer hold on and lost consciousness, which was a big moral blow for the girl, and she could not take her eyes off the guy. But the Gargoyle King wasn't going to wait for attention to be turned on him again, so he swung his sword for another attack. Shelley noticed everything at the last moment, but she didn't have the strength to resist, and she only closed her eyes, ready to accept death. But Chrome decided to intervene. He may have been afraid that people would kill him, but he couldn't sit and watch someone get killed, so he grabbed Frank's sword and repelled the king's attack. As soon as the sound of metal blades was heard, Shelley opened her eyes and saw a stranger, which surprised her. But most of all, Guido was surprised, as the sound of the ringing brought him to consciousness. At the moment when Chrome ran away from people, he was sure that as soon as he was discovered, he would be killed, but he was more afraid that he would have to fight with people and hurt them. However, his goal of becoming an adventurer, precisely to protect people by fighting monsters, immediately came to mind. And Frank's team was going to the bottom of the dungeon, risking their lives to save millions of innocents, so the hero believed that he had to help them. Chrome managed to hold off the Gargoyle King's attack, but he realized that there was a big difference in levels between them. Chrome managed to repel the attack, but another attack immediately followed, and the tired hero barely held it back. Having fought back, the hero retreated, taking a small distance and watching the boss, planning the battle tactics, realizing that he would definitely not be able to overcome the monster alone. At the same time, people could not help him, but they were also unable to escape, and the king had minor wounds on his head, eye and stomach. While Chrome was assessing the situation and the enemy, he didn't notice how the Gargoyle King swung and failed to repel the attack. Not only did Chrome lose his sword, but he was also mortally wounded, yet it looked so dangerous to people. The regeneration immediately worked, and the hero quickly grabbed the sword that flew out of his hands and immediately rushed into the attack, which struck the king of the gargoyles. The Chrome man realized that the eye on the belly was the monster's weak spot, so when it opened, he cut the eye socket and the belly across. Out of anger, The Gargoyle King began to swing both swords back and forth, hoping to hit the stupid bug that had wounded him. Meanwhile, Chrome managed to retreat, and the regeneration almost closed the deep cut. And as soon as the hero saw the complete healing, he immediately stood up for a second round with the monster. But the trained Gargoyle King decides to use magic and surrounds himself with a fiery roar, not allowing the hero to approach him. And then, through his spell, the monster suddenly attacks Chrome with a sword, but the hero already guessed about the attack, so he managed to dodge the blow. But he didn't appreciate where he was moving, and didn't notice how he had reached a dead end. And now he couldn't escape the enemy's attack. Shelley was watching everything. She didn't have time to warn the stranger about the wall behind her, so she could only watch in fear, as the Gargoyle King again lowered his sword in a deadly blow on the man. But neither the girl nor the Gargoyle King guessed that the stranger was a hidden mimic, and would repel the attack with his own claws. Since the gargoyle was now contained and exposed, Chrome thrust his sword into the eye on the monster's belly. While hidden from the humans by its powerful body, the hero remained undiscovered. The Gargoyle King couldn't retreat, so he conjured a roar of fire around himself to burn the enemy. Chrome had to let go of the enemy's red-hot sword and hands, and because of the fire he could hardly see what was happening. However, Chrome managed to dodge another sword attack in time, and tried to understand how the gargoyle survived what he thought was a fatal wound. Chrome managed to see the state of the eye on his stomach, and it was clearly affected. However, the king continued to attack with his sword. Chrome was able to heal himself thanks to regeneration, but his mana was running out. Soon he would not be able to use regeneration, and the most terrible transformation for him. The strength of the mimic and the gargoyle was running out. Now the outcome of the battle depends on the stubbornness of each, how much it is enough to withstand. While Chrome was assessing the situation, still pinned against the wall by the fire and unable to escape, the gargoyle attacked again with its sword. Shelley understood that the stranger was in a deadlock, and she needed to help him. Otherwise he would definitely be killed. Guido, too, although he was so exhausted that he could not even stand up, tried to reach for his bow and arrows. The desire not to be in debt to the strange stranger proved stronger, and Guido still managed to reach his bow and shoot an arrow. But the arrow didn't fly straight at the Gargoyle King, but instead curved upwards somewhere. This seemed strange to Chrome, and he followed where the archer was aiming. It turned out that the arrow hit the ceiling above the gargoyle, and it was ready to fall on the monster's head. A large boulder fell on the king's head, knocking him out of action for a moment, and Chrome realized that this was his chance. A chance to attack the eye on the monster's belly again, so Chrome thrust the blade into the eye socket as deep as he could with all his might. This was enough to make the Gargoyle King howl in pain, and Chrome, leaving his sword in the wound, jumped back to avoid being fired upon again. However, the boss was still standing on his feet, and even managed to pull the blade out of the wound, and Chrome did not understand what to do now. The enemy is still not defeated, and he left the sword. The hero could not waste the moment while the king was vulnerable, so he decided to take a desperate step to attack with his own hands. With his hands turned into claws and a mimic, Chrome takes a running start and attacks the Gargoyle King from above to gain a moment of surprise. With no way to defend against the attack from above, the gargoyle is confused, and Chrome again strikes the eye on his stomach. Finally, the eye socket is completely destroyed, and the Gargoyle King falls to the ground dead, and Chrome increases his level to 25. After the dungeon boss dies, the monster hierarchy will change. This will stop the overpopulation for a while, and everything will return to normal. But besides that, Chrome was now worried about whether people had seen his partial transformation during the fight with the gargoyle. Guido, although he managed to get to his feet, saw only part of the fight. Just like Shelley, he only saw that they were saved by a stranger, who also dealt a crushing blow with his bare hands. While Chrome was looking at his new stats and was happy that he had saved people, Guido was watching him closely. The hero had only a few mana points left to transform, but he was naively happy that he was even closer to evolving into a human. At this time, Shelley approached him with gratitude for saving her and the team, and finally introduced herself as expected when meeting. Chrome was frightened by her closeness, because even in the gloom of the dungeon, she could see the spots on his body and fangs. Shelley asked the stranger to introduce himself as well, but Chrome had a measly 10 minutes left to address the stranger, so he muttered something out of fear, and then he suddenly ran away again, afraid to frighten the trio of adventurers with his true mimic form. Guido watched this whole strange scene and, not understanding the reasons for Chrome's actions, considered the stranger strange, but now good. Guido also noticed that the winner did not take the reward from the Gargoyle King, and yet there was an eye there for which a very decent sum could be obtained. But Shelley saw a romantic mystery in the stranger, and took his simple forgetfulness for modesty. Guido, however, was asking himself the same questions about the stranger's identity, and the amazing abilities that allowed him to survive a fatal wound. Although Guido was silent, Frank, who had come to his senses, understood everything from his friend's face, so he advised him to think less and be grateful. For Shelley and Guido, Frank being alive was good news, and the swordsman turns out to have seen the rest of the battle and asked his friend not to look for hidden motives. Since Frank was still weak, Guido climbed onto the monster and cut out its eye as a reward, but the swordsman watched and demanded that he work more carefully so as not to damage it. Shelley wanted to give the reward to the stranger honestly, and Frank promised to give him part of the reward from the guild, but they need the eye as proof of clearing the dungeon. Shelley was curious if they would be able to meet Chrome again, and not just to give him the reward. The stranger interested her. Meanwhile, Chrome managed to escape and people did not notice his transformation into a mimic. Out of breath from a long run, he finally took a break. The transformation would have lasted longer if it weren't for the frequent regeneration. But now, with the new level, he will be able to transform for 6 hours. Chrome noticed that it took half a day to restore half of his mana, so he thought about finding a shelter for himself somewhere among people and living in a village. Chrome missed his sister very much, especially since he had promised to return to her. So now he was in such a hurry to go out into the world. Much later, the adventurers returned to the city of Leesburg and caused a stir in the Adventurers Guild with their news of defeating the dungeon boss. Frank talked about how his team fought the Gargoyle King, and how if it weren't for them, the monsters would have soon broken through to the city. The guild leader was also there, and listening to the story, he couldn't believe that only 3 adventurers had defeated the king. But Frank had no intention of taking credit for someone else's glory, so he honestly admitted that the dungeon boss was not defeated by just the 3 adventurers. Shelley immediately jumped into the conversation and told them about the mysterious boy from the dungeon who helped them, which was even harder to believe. The head of the guild was sure that the girl had inhaled bad mana and was now talking nonsense, so he turned around and was about to leave the meeting. However, the girl assured him that it was true and began to describe the guy, only slightly romanticizing the image of the handsome man, since Guido remembered the pallor, sunken cheeks, and terrible bruises under the stranger's eyes. While Shelley and Guido argued about the guy's true appearance, Frank also told about the guy and his heroism, and that he owed him his life. The old man's reluctance to take his word for it was understandable after such contradictory testimony, but Frank didn't ask for blind faith. He knew that proof would be needed, so he presented the eye of the Gargoyle King. This caused even more commotion in the guild. Everyone wanted to look at the eye, but even more everyone wanted to know why the boy from the stories did not take the reward. Whatever everyone's thoughts, almost everyone unanimously agreed that he was some kind of local idiot who liked to swing his fists. The one who stood out the most in the theory was Shelley, who came up with the idea that Chrome was a bodyguard from the royal family who honed his skills in the dungeon. Frank felt awkward in front of the stranger, that because of his clumsy story they thought of him as a fool, but even he admitted to thinking so. Among the crowd in the guild was Carmen, who heard a story about a strange gray-haired guy in the same dungeon where the unknown person saved her. Now the monsters will be weakened, and the dungeon will not pose a strong threat, and there will be several years until the birth of a new boss. The dungeon will be safer than before, and Carmen decided to try to find her brother there during this time. After providing the proof, Frank left the guild leader's office with a large bag of gold, for which he considered it worth the risk. But Guido was more rational and understood that half would go towards treatment, buying new weapons and armor, and also rent, and there would be only a little left for 3. But Shelley was worried about the stranger's fate, and at that moment Frank already considered himself owed nothing to the guy, since he himself had run away, thus refusing the reward. However, in any case, Frank first decided to divide the earnings into 3, and gave his comrades each their share. But the swordsman threw another bag of coins at Shelley from above, like some kind of gift, which made the girl outraged. But it turns out Frank remembered that after the mission the girl wanted to return to her hometown, destroyed by monsters, to help rebuild it. The girl was so grateful to her friend that she bowed deeply and promised to thank her friend tenfold one day. Shelley had a duffel bag, so she went straight from the guild to her homeland, waving goodbye to her comrades, who waved back. Guido remained silent the entire time. But as soon as the girl disappeared from sight, he immediately decided to clarify why Frank gave the girl his donation, which he received for the loss of his parents during the monster raid. Frank had heard that in a few years the kingdom would become a nest of monsters, so neither money nor the efforts of adventurers mattered to him. However, people are fools by nature who strive to do good deeds, like Guido, who never ran away, continuing to protect his friends. Frank's theory may have been clear, but the swordsman sent Shelley to a city destroyed by monsters, a city that even the heavens seemed to have forgotten about. Chrome continued to advance through the dungeon and clear it of monsters, while increasing his level. The guy spent the whole day killing various monsters, but he didn't even get enough points for 1 level, and that's because there is no boss, and new monsters are not born. In a couple of days, groups of adventurers would come here for ingredients from the corpses of monsters, which meant it was dangerous to stay now, but it was also dangerous to leave. Chrome wanted to manage to raise his level by a couple of points to increase the amount of mana before going to the city to Carmen, but it didn't work out. Due to the darkness of the dungeon, he managed to hide his fangs and bruises, but in the capital it would not work, so he had to think of a better place to settle. It was then that Chrome remembered the dialogue with the last employer, who refused to go to the city of Ottville. According to that guy, the city has turned into a ghost town. Even if there are monster raids, robberies, and murders, no one will care. No one in their right mind will go there. A city full of lawlessness, where no one cares about anyone else and no one asks unnecessary questions, was ideal for the secretive and strange Chrome. When turning into a human, it will hide his height and claws, and the cloak will cover up the remaining flaws in the form of fangs and pallor. Hoping that he would earn a lot from the ingredients he picked up from the monsters, Chrome made up his mind and left the dungeon. In human form, Chrome walked through the city, gray like his skin, and broken, and was surprised that, despite the rumors, people lived here. Even in such a dangerous moment, Chrome thought about how great it would be to return to people, even though they looked at him askance. But common sense prevailed, and he remembered about secrecy and the need to buy closed clothing. Chrome's first target was the guild headquarters, where he would get some money and then go get some clothes and a hotel. Full of inspiration, our fool threw 3 whole stones above level 20 onto the counter, expecting bags of gold. And although the giant appraiser was amazed by such rare things, as well as by the lack of muscles of the adventurer to obtain them, his face was stingy. Chrome picked up the gargoyle eyes, which were rare and would have fetched a fortune in the city, but here he got a pittance. The seller was not only stingy with emotions, but also with money, so he suggested leaving if the guy's payment was too small. In response to Chrome's arguments, the seller explained that they were not in the capital, and that they did not ask unnecessary questions here, since the guy could have stolen these stones and was now passing them off as his own. In this guild, they don't check the level and rank of the adventurer, whether the person got the ingredients legally or not, and they won't even look askance if you come in bloody. But if the guy is not satisfied with this either, then Chrome was advised to leave the guild and the city. Look for a seller who will buy the stones and ask reasonable questions on his own. Chrome understood that he had been robbed, and the money he had earned would last for 3 days at most. The hero didn't know the local customs yet, so he couldn't even bargain, so he had to put up with a small fee. Chrome was noticed by a man with a red dragon emblem on his cloak, who was also at the guild headquarters, and was closely watching the guy. And when Chrome left the headquarters, he followed him and introduced himself as the local famous adventurer Jeff. While Chrome was wondering if he could trust Jeff, Jeff grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and pushed him against the wall with a strong blow. Chrome didn't immediately understand what was happening, but when Jeff demanded that he give him the money he got for the gargoyle's eyes, he realized that this was typical extortion. Chrome should have expected something like this to happen in the city of robbers, but he didn't expect it to happen so quickly. But he wasn't one to be blackmailed. Jeff was confident in his strength, but Chrome was stronger. It was easy for the hero to bend the enemy's palm, which grabbed him, and throw him to the ground with a jerk. The bandits who were nearby immediately began to mock the famous Jeff, who could not cope with an opponent who looked like a skeleton. While Jeff was indignant, Chrome was already assessing the situation, and, first of all, the enemy, whose level, in his opinion, was about 20. Evil Jeff, egged on by the taunts of his fellow bandits, jumped up from the ground and immediately drew his sword, promising to take revenge on Chrome. Chrome couldn't believe that the guy decided to start a fight with a gun on a crowded street with many witnesses. And then those same bandits jumped up to Jeff and began to restrain the guy, trying to cool the swordsman's ardor. While Jeff was being held back, Chrome quickly lunged and kicked the sword out of Jeff's hands, something none of the participants in the dispute expected. And while the bandits were distracted by the sword that flew out, Chrome quickly rushed away, running away from the battlefield, not wanting to enter into a fight. Jeff didn't try to catch up with his failed victim, but he kept shouting after him for a long time that Chrome was a coward and would definitely kill him the next time they met. Chrome managed to escape, but the reason for his escape was not fear or weakness. The hero did not want to waste mana. The day came to an end, and Chrome sat in his hotel room, complaining that he was more tired than in the dungeon. The money earned was enough to pay for the hotel, buy a weak rusty sword and a cloak that someone had already worn. Chrome would like to spend some time among people, but he will have to gather information about the city and then go back to the dungeon. Shelley also arrived in Ottville and visited her temple, but the priest who looked after the orphans was indignant at the amount of money donated. But Shelley was surrounded by the children she worked so hard for in the capital, and their sweetness inspired her, and she was ready to work even harder. The Holy Father insisted that the girl spend more on her own needs and forget this city as a terrible memory. But this was her home, and she felt responsible for the city, the church, and the children. And then one of the boys ran up to Shelley and started asking about the girl's popularity as an adventurer in the capital, and she was not against telling a couple of stories. Shelley was an honest girl, but even she had to lie to the kids' questions about the capital's willingness to help with the disaster hole that was destroying the city. The girl had seen her peculiar family and given them the money, so now she was saying goodbye to them to return to the capital. At parting, the Holy Father blessed the girl and asked her to be careful, take care of herself, and not to return to the poor city. Chrome had been wandering around the city since early morning, but he hadn't managed to talk to anyone. Everyone looked at him like he was crazy and avoided him. Chrome was already thinking about collecting more ingredients from the dungeon and heading to the capital. But he would obviously be captured there, and here no one paid attention to him. In addition, in the capital there was a high probability of meeting acquaintances who knew about his death, and crossing paths with them was even more dangerous. Chrome wandered through the city and could not stop at comparing the capital and Ottville, not knowing what to do or where to go. To the surprise of both Shelley and Chrome, they met on one of the faces of the godforsaken city, but the emotions from the meeting were opposite. Even back then in the dungeon, Chrome had hoped not to meet Shelley and her friends again, especially since he didn't want to do it in daylight. But Shelley clearly saw God's mercy in this, and decided to remind Chrome of the circumstances of their first meeting, so that he would definitely remember her. The girl didn't even realize that she was thinking out loud, so she boldly predicted a fateful meaning for this meeting, romanticizing what was happening. Chrome remembered the girl and the information he had managed to find out about her in the dungeon, but he only remembered her name and the lowest level among the team. Chrome didn't think Frank's team were criminals, but rather that they had come from the capital, so he didn't understand what the girl was doing in such a city. While Chrome was thinking about how strange he looked because of his silence and was thinking about how to escape, Shelley was again interested in the name of her savior. Not finding anything better, Chrome shouted that the girl was mistaken, and without looking back, rushed in the direction from which he came, which surprised the girl. However, the swordswoman had so many questions for the guy that even Frank's warning about the stranger's criminal activity did not frighten her, and she ran after him. Although Shelley screamed after him about her desire to thank him, Chrome, scared that he had been discovered, continued to run without slowing down. Chrome managed to break away and escape. The girl lost him at the intersection of alleys and did not know where to go to look for him. Meanwhile, Chrome ran into a dead end with an incredibly high wall, but out of fear of meeting Shelley again, the hero decided to climb over the wall. Transforming his hands into mimic hands with large claws, Chrome climbed up the wall, which turned out to be a difficult task. However, when Chrome managed to grab onto the edge and had to pull himself up, the sword fell out of his belt, and since it was expensive, he had to go back for it. Chrome jumped to the ground, but did not take into account the peculiarities of transformation, so his bones were damaged upon landing. At that time, Shelley found him, and when she heard where the guy jumped from, she froze in surprise and asked again. Chrome's bones were healing quickly, so he tried to get up, while Shelley apologized for causing the hero more suffering. The girl's calmness was transmitted to Chrome, so he decided to clarify whether the girl really wasn't going to ask about the past. Although the girl sincerely said that she only wanted to thank him for saving her, Chrome was cautious, because she was the only one who tried to talk to him. And then Shelley opened her big cat eyes again and asked Chrome to say his name. Everyone was avoiding Chrome, so now he felt extremely awkward that someone was interested in him, but nevertheless he introduced himself with his real name. Chrome wanted to know why Shelley was in this city, but seeing how embarrassed she was, he regretted his question. But Shelley decided to talk about her hometown, the monster overpopulation incident, and earning money for her family. She visits her family once a year, and each time she observes the city's ever-increasing decline, the increasing tyranny of the bandits, and the increasing danger. Now it was clear to Chrome why the city had become a haven for bandits, but he decided to clarify whether the city had always been inhabited by bandits. But it turned out that the city had been prosperous in the past, not comparable to the capital. But the residents loved their city with all their hearts, and life was in full swing in it. The overpopulation of monsters, which was not foreseen by local adventurers, destroyed the city, and the monsters settled on the trade roads, which scared everyone away from Ottville. Traders stopped visiting the city, and all the nobility fled after them. But criminals arrived and began to protect the locals from monsters. Although criminals protect residents, they do not consider them people and are always extorting money, of which there is not much. That's why Shelley is so determined to become a first-class adventurer, and one day bring peace to her hometown. The girl's dream, which was similar to the hero's own dream, appealed to him, and he looked at his new acquaintance differently. In the church, after the swordswoman left, that same boy told the Holy Father that he too would grow up and become an adventurer, like his sister Shelley. It turns out that the guy had already developed his first fire summoning skill, which he had been honing every day. The boy was also inspired to work hard and earn a lot of money for the church, to help their church and other orphans. Suddenly the Holy Father heard footsteps in the churchyard and became worried, since they were no longer expecting guests. Two people wearing cloaks with the emblem of a red dragon entered the church. The men were unfamiliar to the boy. Among the strangers was the adventurer Jeff, who was surprised that there was still someone in the wretched temple, and apparently even working. But the Holy Father immediately found out that the guests were from the dangerous Red Dragon gang, which controlled the city and was very dangerous. Jeff said that their gang was running out of workers, so he demanded that they give him children, and that they had to have skills. Moreover, this is a demand of the gang leader, and there is no way to avoid cooperation, hinting that the church will be destroyed for refusal. The kid didn't know the strangers, but he felt that they were bad, and his whole body was shaking with fear. Only the hope for skill gave him the strength to stand. Jeff's friend was calmer, and suggested that the Holy Father listen to logic, because the fewer children, the less waste and trouble. The Holy Father fell on his knees before the people of the Red Dragon and offered to take him away, but not to harm the children. And while Jeff began to mock the decrepit and useless old man, the kid jumped forward, already conjuring fire for an attack. The Holy Father did not have time to stop the boy. Jeff was once to learn about the useful fighter, and the man who received the fire strike did not even try to take cover. The blow was so weak that it didn't even leave a shadow on the man's clothes. But he decided to show the guy his level of skill. By creating a ball lightning near one of the walls of the church, the man destroyed it, leaving not even ashes from the stones. Seeing the difference in skill, Tess fell to his knees, realizing that he would not be able to defeat them and protect his family. The magician slowly approached the boy, assuring him that if he went with them, he would definitely learn to use his power and reach the same level as him. The Holy Father was afraid for Tess, and remembering that he had fought before, he grabbed a pike and decided to attack the magician from behind. But Jeff noticed the old man and parried his blow, protecting his comrade, while grumbling that the Holy Father was making life difficult, not only for himself, but for them as well. The old man covered the boy with his body and now tried to shout to him, demanding that he run from the church. Tess managed to escape, and Jeff wanted to run after him, but his comrade left him, offering to first deal with the Holy Father, after which he quickly cut the old man's chest with a sword. At this time, the rest of the children came out to the noise, allowing the bandits to discover them, and seeing what was happening, they became frightened. But they couldn't escape. Jeff threatened them that the old man would be killed if they even moved without permission. The magician held the old man with one hand, and with the other he was accumulating energy for ball lightning, offering the old man to give up his children before his head was blown apart by lightning. Shelley at this time helped Chrome return to the main road, since during the escape he got lost in the courtyards. Shelley wanted to spend more time with her new acquaintance, so she offered to give him a tour of the city and its surroundings. And then she remembered that she, Frank and Guido had divided Chrome's reward between themselves, and she had given it all to the church, and now she didn't know what to do. At first, Chrome was embarrassed and did not want a reward, but when he touched the almost empty wallet, he had to bow his head and ask the girl for 200 coins. While the girl was counting out money for Chrome, he asked the girl to tell him more about the local dungeon. But his request was interrupted by the loud cry of Tess, who ran towards them and called Shelley. Even from afar it was clear that he was crying. Shelley immediately knelt down and began to calm the boy down, scolding him for walking alone in a dangerous city. Through tears, the boy briefly told about the threat to the Holy Father, and Shelley immediately apologized to Chrome, getting ready to run to save the Holy Father. But Chrome immediately understood that people came first for the orphans, and that children were also in danger, so he immediately ran after the girl. Chrome wanted to help the girl because she is now the most reliable source of information about the city, and besides, he also grew up as an orphan in the church and wanted to protect the same. The Holy Father, despite all the torture and terrible pain, held on, not wanting to give the children to the bandits from the Red Dragon. Even Jeff, who was watching everything, was fed up with the old man's stubbornness, and since the lightning torture did not help, he decided to use another method. Jeff decided to play the role of a good cop, and despite the fact that he had stepped on the old man, he began to give him reasons to get rid of the children. But no matter what the bandits said, the Holy Father loved orphans, and even if he had to endure hunger to feed them, he did not mind. Jeff's comrade was already beginning to get tired of the Holy Father's virtue and the waste of time on him, so he turned to the children and suggested that they watch and remember. The magician stood by the body of the Holy Father, calling down lightning, and was ready to finish off the old man, when Chrome and Shelley appeared in that very opening in the wall. The magician was outraged that he was interrupted, and that in the city of bandits the rule of not interfering in other people's business was violated, so he advised the hero to pass by. And Jeff looked closely at the stranger, not understanding why he seemed familiar to him. Shelley, who was standing next to Chrome, recognized the emblem in the bandits. She was scared by the rumors about them and what they could do to the children in them. The magician decided to become a teacher for Chrome and tell him the rules of non-interference in their city, and what could happen if they were broken. And then Jeff finally remembers the hero and their previous meeting at the guild headquarters, and mocks the fact that Chrome ran away then. The hero also remembered Jeff and his words about revenge, so he was not surprised that now, when there was no one who could stop them, the bandit intended to end their argument. As the enemy slowly approached Chrome, he thrust his sword forward, causing Jeff to make more mockery of the rust on the blade. Jeff laughed at Chrome's desire to act heroic in the presence of the young lady. But the hero was not so simple. He noticed how scared Jeff himself was. And the next moment, Chrome swung his sword and attacked Jeff. Although the blow was parried, it gave him an advantage. In addition to the desperate act, Jeff was amazed at how fast and agile the opponent, whom he considered an amateur, turned out to be. Although Jeff had a fleeting guess about the enemy's high level, his narcissism did not allow the thought that the level could be higher than his. Jeff thoughtlessly put all his strength into swinging the blade, and missed the moment when the tip of Chrome's sword was at his chest. Luckily, he managed to burp Jeff, otherwise Chrome would have pierced him through long ago, while only taking a step. While Jeff was catching his breath and examining himself, Chrome quietly approached his opponent and put his blade to him. Towering over his enemy and holding him at gunpoint, Chrome could finally allow himself to mock Jeff and his moral deformity. Jeff was, of course, scared by the prospect of death, but he was even more surprised that he was shaking with fear in front of what seemed to him to be such a brat as Chrome. At this time, behind Chrome, a magician decided to intervene in the fight. Already holding a summoning pentagram over himself, he walked towards a pair of swordsmen. Chrome managed to notice the thunder summoning magic in time to jump back and prevent even the slightest damage. However, the mage also wielded a sword, so after distracting the enemy with magic, he attacked Chrome, but the guy resisted here too. And the magician was confident in his strength. He calmly warned Chrome that he was superior to Jeff in strength and level. But Chrome was thinking that he couldn't fight at full strength in the presence of witnesses in the form of the Holy Father, Shelley, and the children. The magician could boldly use all his skills, but Chrome could not transform and was much inferior to him in human form. But even so, Chrome kept up the pace in the sword fight, loudly parrying every attack from the Red Dragon's member. Jeff caught his breath and watched the fight, confident that Chrome would never be able to cope with his friend. But he decided to help by finishing off the hero from behind. In the heat of the battle, Chrome didn't notice how he almost approached Jeff, and the swordsman was already aiming at his back. But Shelley stood up for her new friend and repelled the attack. Apparently scared of facing the Red Dragon and a higher-level opponent, the girl identified herself as Jeff's opponent. Selfish Jeff was angry that his plans were once again thwarted, so he began to furiously attack the girl, swinging his sword widely. Only during the fight did the girl realize how big the difference was between her and her opponent. The guy was definitely faster than her. Jeff also understood his advantage. The girl only killed monsters, which means she doesn't know about the cunning of a person in battle, and is not mentally ready to kill. Shelley was a sweet adventurer who easily approached a stranger in a dungeon. But she was not stupid. She knew her weaknesses as well as Jeff. There was an active fight between Chrome and his opponent, but no matter how much the hero tried to attack, with a weak sword and body, it was impossible to wound the enemy. Jeff's friend was not one to rejoice in the use of force, so he suggested that Chrome think again about laying down his arms and retreating. Moreover, the man suggested that they separate in such a way that no one would pursue Chrome. Even from the gang, so to speak, no one would ever see each other. But Chrome was against it. Even being a weakling, he never wanted to become like his opponent. And being a weakling, he managed to become an adventurer. After everything he had been through, Chrome was no longer afraid of the likes of the mage in front of him, so he fiercely declared his desire to continue the fight. This illogical behavior seemed childish to the magician, and he was already quite tired of it, so he stopped holding back and charged his sword with lightning. Chrome had never seen such a method of using magic before, so he was so fascinated by it that he missed the moment when the opponent swung at him. However, Chrome managed to dodge the blow. The charged sword flew a mere centimeters away from him. Now there is no point in trying to parry the enemy's attacks. The sword will break immediately, and you can't attack. In human form, you will die immediately. Shelley was distracted by the commotion between Chrome and his opponent. Her new acquaintance had gotten too serious an opponent and she was worried. Jeff, who was nasty by nature, immediately used this moment to attack, but the girl was quicker and parried the blow. To Jeff's surprise, he surpassed the girl in both level and combat skills, but she easily parried all his attacks. Shelley hadn't even started sweating yet. But Jeff was already barely breathing and his legs were buckling from fatigue. The swordsman didn't understand what was happening, and Shelley decided to laugh at the fact that he was just mindlessly waving his sword, while his blade was devoid of will and determination. The girl, and even lower in level, decided to teach Jeff. It is not surprising that he fell into a rage and thoughtlessly rushed at her. But Shelley was determined to quickly deal with the enemy and protect Chrome, who was not involved in the church, but got caught up in this showdown. Meanwhile, unable to attack, Chrome could only dodge the enemy's blows, but he too was already at his limit. Chrome had to spin and try to avoid the walls. If he was pinned down, it would be impossible to avoid a direct attack, and he wouldn't be able to withstand it. The Red Dragon Bandit also egged him on, so Chrome thought about removing the transformation, but there were children nearby, the Holy Father and his new girlfriend, people whom he was afraid to scare away and even distract from the fight. Chrome was tormented, not knowing what to do, continuing to evade the blow. He looked for an opportunity, but inexorably returned to the idea of gaining his true appearance. In the dungeon, he was lucky enough to save Frank's team, but if Chrome turns into a monster now, people will unite against him. It seemed like a good option to him, since the destruction of the church would be avoided. But Chrome didn't want Shelley to look at him with disgust. Chrome was essentially a monster, with or without disguise, so his logical side didn't understand what he was up against. The magician realized that the hero was simply running away and would not attack, only stalling for time, so he decided to drive the guy into a trap and kill him. Still controlling the charged sword, the magician summoned a separate ball lightning, and such skillful mastery of two spells at the same time surprised Chrome. Chrome stared at the magician and missed the attack, only managing to cover himself with his hand at the critical moment, which fried it a little, and he fell to the ground. The bandit immediately and decisively rushed at Chrome, noting to himself how deftly he had dodged his ball lightning and praised him for his amazing dexterity. Chrome only had time to notice how a sword sparkling with lightning was flying towards him, and behind it a bandit who was cold-blooded to other people's lives. But even so, Chrome managed to put his rusty sword out at the last second to repel the attack, although he knew that it couldn't. Of course, Chrome's sword was shattered into pieces, and the enemy's blade went into the hero's body, burning. The bandit immediately realized that even in such a short moment, Chrome had figured out how to use his sword to direct the enemy's blade towards non-vital organs. However, in his opinion, this was a pathetic attempt, if not instantly. Then the guy would still die. But something unexpected happened. While trying to extract the knife from the enemy's body, the bandit encountered a problem. The sword was stuck as if in a rock and could not be pulled out. The bandit realized that the boy had used regeneration and the sword had grown into his flesh. But the man did not notice that not only the hero's side had changed, but also his hands. Chrome was so pleased that he managed to press his opponent to himself that his calm grin scared the Red Dragon Bandit. And indeed, Chrome's eyes, despite the sword in his side and his wounded hand, looked at his enemy with the eyes of a predator. The bandit guessed almost everything except that Chrome weakened the effect of the camouflage by making the skin stronger. Amazing abilities, dexterity in thinking, and most importantly self-control frightened the bandit, and he wanted to know who was standing in front of him. The frightened bandit retreated, but he should have run, because the mimic's hands with huge claws were already flying in his direction. But instead of tearing or piercing the enemy, Chrome only hit him in the jaw, knocking the bandit unconscious. After returning his hands to human form, Chrome carefully pulled the sword out of himself, but he was still tired and breathing heavily. The priest had been watching the fight all this time. He hadn't seen the mimic's hands, so he was only surprised at Chrome's vitality. Jeff and Shelley couldn't help but notice the winner, both amazed that a weakling like Chrome could defeat an experienced swordsman with magical abilities. The enemy's sword that Chrome had pulled out was now pointed towards Jeff. The hero was wondering what the bandit would do now alone. Now Jeff was outnumbered and pinned down by two talented swordsmen. But it turned out that Jeff also had a skill, and a poisonous fog, which he released into the church. Because of the density of the fog, the swordsman could not see anything. No matter how hard Shelley looked, nothing could be seen, and her eyes were watering. Shelley and Chrome only heard Jeff break the window and jump out of it, threatening that the whole gang would now come to the church and destroy it. In the end, Jeff only reminded the priest that the Red Dragon dictates the rules of this city, and violators are severely punished. Fresh air filled the church from the broken window, and the poison dissipated. And when the bandit ran away, Shelley only calmly exhaled, glad that it did not come to murder. Meanwhile, regeneration had completely healed all of Chrome's wounds, and the boy was glad that he had managed to avoid revealing his identity. The fragments were removed, the priest was bandaged and seated in a chair. Among the children there was a girl who already knew how to treat such serious wounds. The old man sincerely thanked his ward for saving him and her new friend. which was still unusual for Chrome. Even though the children were afraid of the stranger, they still smiled when they looked at him and nodded their heads when the priest said he was grateful. The Holy Father was worried about the boy's injury, but Chrome assured him that everything was fine, and he had already healed himself with his skill. At the same time, Chrome was quite worried, because regeneration took a lot of his mana, and the transformation would not last long. Suddenly, Shelley came forward with a proposal for the Holy Father and the orphans to move, or rather, she insisted, since it was no longer possible to remain in the city. Although the Holy Father understood, no less than Shelley, that it was becoming more dangerous to remain in the city with each passing year, life in the capital was prohibitively expensive. In addition, transporting everyone to the capital will not be easy. In addition to the fact that this also requires money, the children will need to be looked after. Shelley was desperate. She promised to get as much money as needed, to help with everything, just to save the children. The old man claimed that he and the children could take care of themselves, but the couple had to run, because now the whole gang would be looking for them. The Red Dragon Gang will never allow their laws to be broken, especially when the pride and honor of one of their own is at stake. At this point, the conversation ended, and Shelley went to see Chrome off, thanking him again and apologizing for the trouble she had caused. Shelley was curious about where Chrome would go next, but his plans were to first rest at the hotel and then think about it. And then he began to ask a question in a very ambiguous manner, which planted hope in the girl's heart for another meeting. But he bit his tongue in time. Shelley walked the guy to the hotel, since the city was unfamiliar to him, and Chrome scolded himself for thinking that Shelley would be able to leave the city with him. Shelley had thought about this too, and her plans only included the possibility of leaving the city with the luggage in the form of children. She understood the priest, but at the same time she thought that she had to do something, otherwise the bandits would come for them. But she just couldn't come up with a plan. Chrome thought about the situation more globally, and asked his informant to tell him about the dungeon and its location. The dungeon was in the north of the city, but the mere mention of it made Shelley's face darken and her brows draw together. She did not advise Chrome to even approach it, but the fact is that an expedition had been assembled in the capital a long time ago to clear out this dungeon. A squad of well-trained people was completely destroyed by the monsters. Only human remains were found. Chrome was interested in the information about the capital, especially the fact that after this attempt, the city had not received any assistance. Chrome didn't know his future plans, but he understood that first, he needed to clear out the local dungeon and stop the tyranny of the Red Dragon. Initially, Chrome's plan was to live unnoticed in the city and go down into the dungeon to level up. And since the local monsters were not defeated by the capital's military, this is a good chance for him to level up. Also, if Chrome manages to defeat the dungeon boss, the overpopulation will end and the capital will turn its attention to the city. In this regard, the monster form would be very useful to Chrome, so he was determined to become stronger and save the city. At this time, Jeff arrived for an audience with the leader of the Red Dragon Gang and told them that a couple of brats in the church defeated his comrade Ride. Jeff, seething with indignation, talked about Chrome and how the gang should teach the impudent boy a lesson. Jeff thought Chrome was very stupid for deciding to confront the gang, and was very sure that he would make the hero regret humiliating Jeff. But the leader had a different opinion. He didn't like the part of the report where Jeff left his comrade without help and ran away. Gareth, the leader of the gang, stood up from his throne and picked up his weapon, then walked towards Jeff, asking who the boy thought he was. But Jeff did not understand the leader's hint. But he understood that the situation was very delicate for him, and he tried to give a very flattering characterization of the leader. It was easy for Gareth to raise his weapon, but it fell a couple of centimeters from Jeff with a crash and even shaking the walls. Since Jeff, having broken the rule about brotherhood, showed up to the head, it turned out that the guy was more afraid of Chrome than the great Gareth. Jeff tried to correct his situation, and then the chief advised him to think again before abandoning his brother and running away like a coward. Gareth, thanks to his tough character and first-class skills, was able to put together a gang that rules this city. The townspeople gave Gareth the nickname the Beast of Ottville, and the bandit really likes it, and Jeff wanted to be under the protection of such a man. Gareth returned to his throne and approached Canella about the fact that the overcrowding in the nearby dungeons had decreased. Canella was the captain of the gang's defense units, and took direct orders from Gareth. Although Gareth directly threatened the young lady, she did not even bat an eyelid. On the contrary, she was confident in herself and the report. From reliable sources, she learned about spies from the royal order. 2 were identified, but there were clearly more of them. Canella assured that all her people were sent to patrol Ottville, so no one had been watching the dungeon in recent days. This news angered Gareth, but at the same time amused him. The capital again decided to take power over the city for itself, and the leader was not against playing with them. Canella was a lady of character and clearly was not afraid of Gareth, as she boldly spoke out about the wrongness of the leader's decision. insisting not to enter into direct contact. She assumed that the capital wanted to find out the reason for the disaster hole, and she promised to deal with the spies, but later. While it was still dark, Crom left the hotel, and jumping over the roofs of houses, he headed towards the northern side of the city. However, before he had even reached the northernmost point of the city, he had already noticed a hole of disaster, a gate to the dungeon. Crom had prepared himself well for the trip, having slept well and had a hearty breakfast, so he was confident that he was ready to defeat 1,000 monsters. Suddenly, Crom noticed that despite the early morning, when there was not even a hint of sun, there were a lot of people on one of the streets. But a moment later, he noticed the cause, which was a one-eyed monster with a fire skill, setting houses and people on fire. Some of the houses were on fire. People were running and asking for help, and the monster brazenly committed atrocities, aiming fire at people. Crom immediately rushed to help, noting that there was no sign of the promised protection of the red dragon. But suddenly, an adventurer emerged from the crowd. The adventurer ordered everyone to run, helping the weak. But in the crowd there was a man with a sword who wanted to help the guest of the city. But when the monster swung fire magic at the man, the adventurer had to protect the weak man with a holy shield. And then she entered the battle with a sword, while the monster very skillfully parried and attacked with claws. From the roof, Crom watched the slaughter and decided to attack the monster when it was distracted. Seeing the opportunity, Crom immediately jumped off the buildings and cut the monster down with one precise swing of his sword. And then he turned to the adventurer, declaring that he too could fight and was ready to help. Imagine the swordswoman's surprise when she noticed how deeply the guy had wounded the monster. She had no idea that there were still such in this city. At the same time, the guy did not look like one of the gang, and, at her first order to play the role of bait, he rushed at the monster. While Crom distracted the monster, the adventurer charged her sword with holy power, just as the mage ride charged his lightning. This did not go unnoticed by Crom, and he looked away from the fight to watch the amazing skill. Holy magic is considered the most effective weapon against dungeon monsters, so it is not surprising that in one swing, such a sword cut the monster in half. Crom watched what happened closely, and although he was amazed by the adventurer's strength, being a monster, he was afraid of her. The crowd immediately perked up, also admiring the girl's strength. People of all ages showered the adventurer with compliments, but while she was being admired, she herself was in doubt. Since holy magic reacts to monsters, the girl's sword reacted to Crom as well. Meanwhile, Crom was sure that no one suspected anything, and at the same time he managed to help defeat the monster and protect the residents. The adventurer watched Crom and even grabbed the sword, not knowing whether she should use her holy power on him. The hero was unable to determine the level of the monster, but the Cyclops was much stronger than ordinary monsters, and it was also unclear how he entered the city. The red dragon is supposed to protect people from monsters, but none of the gang is visible. No one tried to detain the monster at the border. There are no patrols in this part of the area either, although it is closest to the dungeon and should be guarded more strictly. While Crom was trying to figure out the situation, a man from the crowd approached him from behind and thanked him for his help. Both adventurers seemed unaccustomed to hearing praise, but were clearly pleased that they had saved an entire area. And then the man asked the crowd to thank the adventurers too, and the crowd began to applaud loudly, and Crom shyly tried to refuse. Now that a large crowd of people have seen Crom and will clearly remember him, the more they will look at him and find him suspicious. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a girl named Marie ran up to the swordsman. She was happy that her father had survived. While the girl was thanking the saviors of the area, and her father in particular, the adventurer decided to turn to Crom. No one expected that the monster would still be alive, and would manage to create a fireball behind their backs. The adventurer immediately thought about her stupid mistake, focused on Crom, and completely forgot to double-check the Cyclops. The adventurer prepared to defend herself, and created a holy shield that would attack the monster in return. But the monster turned out to be not stupid, and noticed the most vulnerable person in the crowd, whom he could attack without any problems. The girl was surprised and scared, so she didn't even think about running, and the adventurer was far from the girl. Crom also rushed to help, but he too, in a human body, would not have had time to reach the child. And again the guy was overcome with doubts. He really wanted to save people, as well as to be among them. But in his true form they would not accept him. And most importantly, he would no longer be able to be friends with Shelley. Crom understood that there would be no turning back, but he decided to take off his mask and be an adventurer who saves people, no matter what. In an instant, the hero turned into a mimic and shielded the girl, taking a powerful fiery blow on himself, so much so that even his hands were damaged. The whole crowd was in shock. The child's father was frightened because he recognized the mimic and understood what kind of insidious creature it was in essence. Meanwhile, Crom folded his claws together and, like the blade of a sword, rushed towards the Cyclops. Just one swing of his sharp cats and the Cyclops was finally defeated, and Chrome was awarded a few points. The crowd came to life and began to scream in panic. No one understood where another monster had come from, and Chrome was so scared that he was even afraid to look in the direction of the people. He only heard them whispering among themselves. Although Chrome had defeated the monster and stood victorious over it, he did not have the courage to turn to the crowd. The people did not realize that he had saved them again. However, then he remembered the main victim, a little girl, and began to look for her among the crowd. And when he found her alive and well, he breathed a sigh of relief. The girl's father noticed that the monster was looking for his child, and broke through to her, covering her with his body, shouting at the monster to go away. At that moment, the adventurer attacked Chrome, fortunately with an unloaded sword, so he was able to repel the attack with his claws. The adventurer began to blame the monster, that because of his disguise she began to doubt her abilities, but still turned out to be right. To the rest of the crowd, she explained that the mimic was more dangerous than the Cyclops because it took on human form. The crowd was now even more furious, terrified that a disguised monster was walking among them, and people began to blame the Red Dragon Gang. Chrome understood that people were scared, which is why they were so aggressive. But at the same time, he did not regret that he revealed his disguise in order to save someone's life. The crowd armed themselves with knives and axes, even household items, and those who could threw stones at Chrome. But the adventurer calmed the crowd with stones, fearing that this would anger the monster and he would decide to return. The monster seemed strange to her because it understood their speech, but at the same time it was especially dangerous, so she prepared to go in pursuit and kill. But suddenly the same girl approached the adventurer and asked if she was going to kill the monster, as if it was strange to kill monsters. Immediately, the father and the adventurer began to convince the girl that she had been deceived by the innocent human appearance of the monster. But the child thought differently. People who were afraid not of his act, which saved everyone, but only of his appearance, were strange to her now. And again someone tried to reason with the child, but the girl asked a reasonable question about the fact that the one who saved her could not be a monster. And here the crowd could no longer find an answer. The guy actually fought the monster twice, solely to protect them. And the adventurer, who wanted to immediately rush off in pursuit, was stopped by her colleague, who grabbed her by the shoulder, and was clearly dissatisfied that his partner Mila had disobeyed the order. The girl tried to justify herself to Captain Lamp, but he didn't want to hear anything. They had to leave before the dragons noticed them. The captain explained to Mila that their task was to scout out the situation in the city on the orders of the king, and they had to be careful. Lampa explained to his subordinate that their mission was much more important than chasing some monster, and then demanded a report on what had happened. Mila briefly told about the encounter with the Cyclops and the appearance of the mimic among the crowd, while he was surprisingly intelligent. And then, to the swordswoman's surprise, Captain Lamp began to scold her for interfering in the fight, although she had been ordered not to attract attention. But Mila was an adventurer who wanted to help people and could not pass by. But the captain insisted on his own. In the end, all these merciful phrases about helping civilians got on the captain's nerves, and he put his sword to the neck of his subordinate. The captain warned that he would personally take the girl's life for disobedience next time, and she had to obey. Mila again emphasized the intelligent monster, but the captain tried to convey to the girl that they needed to prevent them from increasing in size. Ottville became a ghost town, not only because it was abandoned by the authorities and taken over by the Red Dragon Gang, because a disaster hole has appeared, and they need to find out who is to blame for its appearance. Otherwise, the catastrophe will engulf the entire continent. Therefore, the captain ordered Mila to forget about heroism and to take up the mission, on the success of which the existence of the entire country depended. And Chrome managed to run to that very hole of disaster that was the gate to the dungeon and froze in front of them. The dungeon that had destroyed the entire city was in front of Chrome, and he was gathering his thoughts, assuring himself that he would be able to cleanse it of all the monsters. Chrome thought about how happy the locals would be, how they would live happily, and how the power of the dragons would fall. In addition, in the dungeon, he will probably level up and reach a new evolution, and he will probably be able to go to the capital with it. While Chrome was rolling up his sleeves to go down into the dungeon, Shelley also decided to go there, and the Holy Father tried to dissuade her. But the girl was stubborn and had decided everything long ago. Only after apologizing to the priest did she immediately run to the north of the city. Shelley understood that she couldn't take all the orphans to the capital, and in order for the dragons to leave the city, it was necessary to clear the hole of monsters. Chrome entered the Hole of Calamity, but walking through the tunnel, this place did not seem dangerous to him. On the contrary, it was too calm, and there was no talk of overcrowding. But Chrome was not stupid, and remembered the death of an entire expedition consisting of royal knights, so he decided to be on the alert. While the hero was gone, he managed to calculate that it would take several days to clear this dungeon, taking into account rest, and he could be in the form of a monster. The human form took a lot of mana, and it was tiring to maintain, but now he felt calm, and thanks to the claws, even safe. The dungeon seemed strange to the hero, since there were too many passages in it, and it seemed impossible to understand which one led to the boss. When Chrome had to choose between two tunnels, he wondered which one to choose, since there was no hint which one led down. He decided to solve the problem with a sword, burying the end of the blade into the ground, but not too deeply, so that the sword would not stand. And then Chrome let the sword fall and show the way, as the sign of all adventurers says, and, to the surprise of many, works. Chrome entered the indicated passage and continued walking, increasingly surprised by the tranquility of the overcrowded dungeon, while not noticing the danger. The hero did not notice that there was a web tripwire in front of him and fell into a trap. Immediately his leg was grabbed and the guy fell face down on the ground. Chrome decided not to twitch and not to attract the possible attention of the enemy, so he only slightly turned his head to see what was wrong with his leg. When he realized that it was a web, he was surprised because he had never met such giant spiders that could weave such a trap. And again, as soon as Chrome thought about enemies, 2 giant bodies with 8 legs and 6 eyes appeared in front of him. The 2 demonic spiders were level 23 and had stats higher than the hero, and they came to feast on their trapped victim. To Chrome's surprise, the demonic spiders of the dungeon began to cast magic similar in light and energy to sacred magic. The hero literally stared for a moment, but then came to his senses and began to think about escaping, but his leg was captured. Moreover, the web did not simply tighten the ankle, but seemed to stick to it and hold the leg in a vice, not even allowing it to be lifted off the ground. The magic of the demonic spiders caused a rockfall, not of small pebbles, but of small boulders, the impact of which could beat someone to death. Since Chrome couldn't escape, he covered himself with his hands, but even so, he received considerable damage all over his body. The hero hoped to wait until the moment when the opponents came closer, and then he could break through the web and attack them. As soon as the rockfall ended, Chrome drew his sword and pointed it at the enemies, taking up a position to attack. But the demonic spiders were not so inclined to be left without prey so easily, so they immediately put their sticky web into action. Chrome's hand was suddenly caught in a sticky web, and the hero dropped his sword in surprise, not understanding what was happening. The second spider grabbed the second free hand, and the hero found himself literally tied hand and foot, so he thought about the situation and his position. The demonic spiders were clearly sentient, as they were now laughing at the captured hero and rejoicing in their victory. Chrome tried to tear the web off his hands, but when it didn't work, he decided that it could be used to his advantage. Now it was not the hero but the spiders that were trapped, as Chrome grabbed both skeins of web and pulled them towards himself, along with the spiders. Chrome turned out to be physically stronger than both spiders, and as soon as he pulled the threads of the web, the spiders were immediately thrown into the air after it and flew towards the hero. And Chrome intercepted the threads and twisted them towards each other, so that the spiders bumped heads with each other and were a little disoriented. Both demonic spiders fell in front of Chrome, who was already in a pose to attack with his claws, ready to destroy the enemies before they could escape. With just one sure swing of his claws, Chrome cut both spiders, not giving them even a chance to escape. For each spider, Chrome received over 100 experience points, and the webs on his leg disappeared on their own as soon as their owners were killed. The points from the spiders were enough for the hero to rise 1 level, but the indicators did not increase. But Chrome was able to figure out that at the beginning of the dungeon, there would be level 23 monsters, and the lower he went, the higher the enemy's level would be. Chrome picked up the sword and put it in his belt, thinking that he wanted to evolve before meeting the boss, so that he could defeat him more easily and for sure. So far, the local monsters haven't caused Chrome any extra problems, so he decided to engage in battle with each one in order to level up and get better. Chrome went further along the dungeon, continuing to wind among numerous passages, and even found a strange exit into a large corridor. And then the hero heard a strange chirping sound behind him, but it was already familiar, so he turned sharply towards the source of the sound. As he suspected, several pairs of green eyes lit up in the shadows, belonging to one monster that was approaching Chrome. It was none other than the demon Spider Queen, level 37, and she had a much more powerful body. Chrome wouldn't be able to throw her up so easily. The spider noticed Chrome and immediately headed towards him to attack, and she was much quicker and faster than her smaller relatives. The queen was rushing towards the hero in such a hurry that she didn't have time to slow down when Chrome jumped back, and as a result, she flew into the wall with all her might. Chrome jumped back at the last moment, so he didn't have time to group himself during the jump and lay flat on the ground, looking at the spider. While the spider was coming to her senses, Chrome quickly got to his feet and decided to run, since the queen was too strong for him alone. But unfortunately for the hero, the spider started chasing after him and caught up with him very quickly, now pursuing him and breathing down his neck. Chrome understood that there couldn't be such monsters at the beginning of the dungeon. Most likely, she crawled out of some passage, sensing the presence of an alien. So Chrome decided to find a passage that the large body of the demon spider queen couldn't fit into. The hero is lucky and quickly finds such a passage. He immediately flies into it, accompanied by the disgruntled cries of the spider. However, while still lying in the passage, Chrome noticed out of the corner of his eye that something was wrong with the new place and raised his head to take a closer look. The cave he jumped into was covered in cobwebs. It seemed there was no free space without sticky thread. Chrome understood that he would not be able to pass by the web untouched. The Spider Queen had deliberately driven him here from the very beginning. The spider continued to stand behind Chrome and with her screams, as if trying to scare the hero so that he would go into her trap, which only confirmed the guy's guess. This awkward moment was enough to remind Chrome of his original plan to defeat monsters and become stronger. With the idea of playing a survival game with the demon Spider Queen, Chrome took out his sword and got into a defensive stance, intending to go towards the monster. The spider didn't know why her victim froze in the passage and didn't fall into her trap, so she first froze and then moved away from the passage. The spider picked up speed and crashed into the top of the passage to collapse it, and thereby push the victim towards the trap. Chrome didn't know what the spider was planning, so he didn't expect a rockfall to rain down on him. And again he only managed to cover it with his hand. Meanwhile, the queen used the rockfall only as a distraction, and was already preparing to attack the hero with her sharp paws. Luckily, Chrome managed to notice the queen's giant paw and jumped to the side, otherwise he would have definitely been killed. While the queen grinned, believing that she would easily defeat the victim, Chrome had already found the monster's weakness in her huge forms, which were easy to hit. To attack, the hero ran up and used the spider's legs to push off and jump into the air and strike from above. The spider clearly didn't expect that someone could match her in speed, much less approach her so boldly, while Chrome was already preparing to strike. Chrome aimed at the neck to cut off the head, but it didn't work. He managed to inflict a small wound, which the hero hoped would slow down the spider. After the blow, Chrome jumped to the side, and the Spider-Woman measured him with a contemptuous look, because he found her weak spot in close combat. The hero, on the contrary, was sharpened for close combat, and not only with a sword and his own claws, which he decided not to use for now. To Chrome's surprise, the spider had another skill in the form of bloody fetters, which were a scarlet substance. Chrome managed to jump back from the substance's fire, but noticed how quickly the spider did it, and that it was clearly some kind of special skill. Therefore, Chrome decided to hide behind a boulder and wait for the moment to attack, because the spider couldn't spit forever. Imagine Chrome's surprise when one of these substances cut off the top of the boulder behind which the hero was hiding, almost taking off his head. A large piece of rock fell right in front of Chrome, frightening Chrome and forcing him to reconsider his battle tactics. The next blow of the bloody fetters hit the wall near Chrome, and the hero again fell under a rockfall, from which he was able to protect himself with his hand. Now it was clear to Chrome that if the Spider Queen hit him with such a web, he would die immediately, so it was necessary to reduce the distance. Chrome had already noticed that it took a couple of seconds for the spider to activate its special skill, but that was enough to get close to her. But the spider was not going to sit idle either, and used her regular web to catch the hero and not let him get close to her. Chrome had to put in a lot of effort to dodge all of the queen's attacks, but he noticed that she was clearly not just attacking. Indeed, the spider planned to create one large web that would cut off the hero's escape route, and then flood him with that red liquid. Now Chrome was cornered and couldn't retreat, and approaching the spider now also seemed very difficult. The hero had already calculated that once the demon Spider Queen activated her special skill, he would definitely be a corpse. The mimic's height is almost 2 meters. With such a height in the cave, it is not easy to dodge an attack. Chrome needed to come up with a new tactic. But then Chrome remembered his special skill, and if his problem was only his height, he could fix it with transformation. Chrome pushed off sharply with his foot and ran towards the spider, and she had already released several threads of web to attack the guy. Chrome ran towards the enemy, grabbing the mask, and counted to 3 to transform at the right moment. As soon as the guy approached the spider, he immediately used the transformation skill, not only reducing himself, but also blinding the enemy. Chrome slid under the webbing, approaching his enemy and intending to attack her. 3 pairs of the spider's eyes noticed Chrome at the last moment, when he had already pushed off the ground to jump in order to attack her with his sword again. In human form, Chrome flew towards the demon Spider Queen, raising his sword above his head and preparing to plunge it into her. Chrome aimed at one of the eyes to blind the enemy and deprive him of at least one advantage. The spider howled in pain and tried to throw the hero off. Watching as green slime flowed out of the spider's eye, Chrome decided to try to gouge out all the eyes to make it easier to kill the queen. The guy managed to notice that the spider had stopped trying to throw him off like a bull at a rodeo, but was aiming her sharp paws at him. Unfortunately, I noticed it too late to dodge, but in time to at least reflect the attack with my sword and defend myself. With this blow, the spider threw the hero off herself and protected her remaining eyes, while preparing her front legs for an attack. Chrome skillfully and dexterously landed like a cat on his hand and feet, preparing to attack the queen of the demonic spiders again. The hero had already calculated that in such a situation the spider would have to either defend herself or run away, but he did not intend to give her such an opportunity. But Chrome forgot that the best defense is an attack, and that's exactly what the spider did, sending new threads of web at the hero. The queen's willingness to continue the fight was a big surprise to Chrome, so he was completely at a loss before the attack. The hero only managed to turn his hands to hide from the web, but it was impossible to escape from the line of attack. Chrome's arms and legs were once again caught in the web, and he had to put in a lot of effort to resist the spider pulling him towards her. The web couldn't be cut with the sword either, and the entire spider didn't succumb to the same trick that the hero had pulled on the two previous spiders. The spider decided to act more abruptly and shook her head so hard that Chrome, at the other end of the web, flew into her mouth by inertia. Chrome was flying into the monster's mouth, and the guy understood that they were planning to eat him alive, which scared him at first. But then he decided that this was his chance. Since the spider wanted him alive so much, he decided that he could arrange it for her, but on his own terms and for his own purposes. Almost right under the spider's nose, Chrome cuts off the hand captured by her web, freeing himself from captivity. Although the spider noticed the enemy's actions, she decided not to refuse a snack and pulled the lonely hand towards herself. Having started to chew the enemy's hand, the spider seemed to be happy that in exchange for her eye, she also took a part of the enemy's eye. But the spider didn't take into account the peculiarities of the mimic's structure. So it was a great surprise when she discovered that she couldn't chew her hand. And Chrome looked at the queen's suffering and enjoyed it. Because he knew that his claws were very strong and very sharp, it was not so easy to chew her. In an attempt to chew the prey, the spider turned Chrome's hand in her mouth with the claws facing up, and they pierced her skull, piercing right through. As soon as the queen of the demonic spiders cried out in pain, Chrome immediately rushed towards her with his sword to finish off the creature. The hero no longer aimed specifically at the eyes. He stuck the sword right in the middle of the skull in order to quickly pierce the monster's brain. Chrome managed to destroy the queen of the demonic spiders, and her body lay at his feet, and his sword was covered in her green blood. Killing the queen brought the hero over 1,000 points and increased his level from 26 to 33, which could not but please the hero. However, the guy understood that this was nothing more than luck. If the spider's teeth had been stronger than his claws, he would have clearly lost. Chrome took on the form of a mimic to save mana and climbed into the spider's mouth to get his hand back. However, the limb was terribly gnawed, but the claws were preserved in perfect condition. However, Chrome, falling on regeneration, put his severed arm to his shoulder, and it really began to grow together. As soon as his arm was completely healed, Chrome decided to rest a little. The battle had exhausted the hero considerably and required a lot of mana, which needed to be restored. It's funny that while in the city at the hotel, Chrome experienced much more stress than now in the dangerous dungeon. Once Chrome had restored his mana level, he went further down the dungeon, defeating monsters and leveling up. Since there were still many passages, Chrome used his claws to leave marks with pointers. So he noticed that on the wall where he came there were already 2 of his marks, which meant that he had already come here for the 3rd time. Out of anger, Chrome punched the wall, since he had been in the dungeon for a day already, but still had not advanced deeper and had not reached the lower levels. Chrome was mentally tired of wandering in circles, so he sat down by the wall, thinking that in his search for a descent, he had at least raised his level from 33 to 37, and pumped up his stats. Chrome still didn't need sleep, but he felt hungry, so he decided to go in search of dinner in the form of a couple of spiders. The hero managed to quickly catch himself some lunch, and deciding to cover his back, he sat down to eat next to the wall. The spiders tasted like rotten veal mixed with expired paint, but they were the only thing that could satisfy his hunger. Suddenly he heard the echo of someone's footsteps and began to listen. It was too dark to see the source of the sound from afar. But Chrome immediately realized that it was not a demonic owl and hardly gargoyles, since they fly, but perhaps Cyclops again. Only later did I realize that the steps were too heavy for the local monsters, most likely because of the armor. So I decided that it was a person. Not wanting to get into an unnecessary fight, Chrome decided to play it safe and use shape-shifting, taking on the appearance of a human. The hero didn't even suspect that his new friend Shelley was approaching him, who also heard a strange sound and carefully peered out from around the corner. Also not wanting to engage in battle, the girl prepared a firecracker that would scare away the monster and was ready to throw it at the enemy. Having already swung, the girl noticed a friend, and both froze from the unexpected meeting, calling each other's name, as if checking each other. At first, Chrome wanted to ask what Shelley was doing in the dungeon, but he interrupted himself and decided to ask what level they were on now that she was walking around here so calmly. In response, the girl took out a map of the dungeon and began to examine it, checking her route to answer the question. And Chrome jumped up in surprise, not believing that a map of the disaster hole existed and trying to look into it to check if this was true. Shelley explained that the map was ancient, but still usable. And Chrome thought about it, since none of the adventurers had mentioned a dungeon map. And now it was finally time for Shelley to ask questions about why Chrome was in the dungeon and why he came there. Chrome decided to hide his true motive, so he said that he came to raise his level, and if he could level up, then kill the boss. Chrome had no idea that Shelley was there for the same reasons as him. But he decided that at her level, going down into the dungeon would be extremely reckless. Chrome asked to lend him the map, offering to remember the girl's way out of the dungeon, and he promised to return the map when he finished here. Shelley didn't know why Chrome had changed, but he didn't look like he had last seen her, which made her sad. However, even through the guy's detachment right now, the girl felt how worried he was about her and realized that he was here for the same reason as she was. He was clearly at a higher level than she was, but she had no intention of backing down and told her friend that she was not going to leave. The girl argued that even the Royal Knights couldn't cope with the hole, and Chrome clearly couldn't cope with it alone. Chrome tried to convince his friend, but she interrupted him and began asking him to take her into battle against the boss of the Abyss Hole. The girl was persistent and came so close to the hero that he became embarrassed and could no longer give any arguments, and Shelley continued to convince him that she would not become a burden. In addition, Shelley explained that the townspeople had dedicated their lives to studying the monsters of the dungeon, and she knew which herbs and stones could help deal with the monsters. And she bought everything she needed to fight off the local monsters, and showed off her large backpack with supplies. Chrome was puzzled by how eagerly the girl was trying to prove her usefulness, although he was still confident in the rightness of his decision to send the girl away. And Shelley continued to look Chrome in the eyes and talk about how she prepared for the dungeon and even knew how to defeat the boss. Chrome thought about the girl's words, her preparation and desire to stay in the dungeon, and also about how much mana he would have to maintain the appearance of a human. Having calculated everything, Chrome decided to leave the girl, but on the condition that as soon as she was wounded, she would immediately go home. At this time, the deputy head of the dragons came to him and reported the discovery of royal knights from the capital who were looking for a man named the Red Reaper. The name of the man he was looking for seemed strange to the leader, and he suspected that it might be a man from his gang. In addition, the bandit said that the adventurer Shelley went into the dungeon alone and doomed herself to certain death. However, the gang leader was clearly interested in other news, as he asked in a very dissatisfied tone about the end of the report. And as soon as the girl stumbled, he immediately grabbed her by the throat and lifted her off the ground, from which she immediately began to wheeze, but did not even try to fight back. And the head immediately reminded that he had ordered the elimination of any adventurer who dared to enter the dungeon of the disaster hole. In addition, what if this girl was a knight in disguise from the capital? The leader was afraid of the truth of his thoughts, so after letting his subordinate go, he immediately gave the order to gather everyone from the gang and head to the hole. The dragon leader did not want the knights to clear the dungeon and destroy the kingdom he had built from the suffering of the inhabitants. Shelley and Chrome were moving through the dungeon and were attacked by a swarm of spiders, which slowly but surely pinned the people to the wall. Chrome covered his friend with himself, holding his sword forward and realizing how troublesome it would be to fight now while keeping an eye on the girl. But to his great surprise, the girl was not going to stand aside. Moving Chrome, she rushed straight at the spiders. The guy did not even have time to react. Meanwhile, Shelley swung a bag of herbal powder that blinded the spiders and threw it right into the face of the first spider. The bag immediately burst and the powder scattered on the spiders. Not only did they close their eyes and see nothing, but the monsters also began to sneeze. One of the spiders tried to strike at random but missed and ran past Chrome and crashed into a stone. Chrome took advantage of the moment and attacked the spider, noticing that with his friend's potions, it really became easier to fight. In just a couple of attacks, they managed to defeat all the spiders and stood over the monsters' bodies, with Chrome leveling up again. Shelley, although tired after the fight, still smiled and supported Chrome, emphasizing what a good team they made. The people moved on and came to 2 new passages, and Shelley pointed to the left one, assuring that by always moving to the left, they would get to the local boss faster. Chrome sighed in resentment, because he didn't even suspect that there was an opportunity to buy a dungeon map in the city. So he wandered around for a whole day, but Shelley hastened to reassure him, telling him that it was unlikely that the guy would be able to buy such a card in the city. At one time, the Red Dragon's bandits destroyed all the maps of this dungeon that the adventurers had, and the one she has was given to her by the abbot. Many adventurers have given their lives to learn the right path, and the dragons did not want the boss to be eliminated, otherwise they would lose their power. And if the townspeople had a map, they would have happily come here long ago to eradicate evil, so she wants to fulfill their wish at any cost. Chrome understood the responsibility on his friend's shoulders, and sympathized with the general grief of the residents of Otfield. The girl noticed that her friend also became sad from her words, and then apologized for starting such a sad story about the past. However, it was this story that gave Chrome the confidence to go further, and he assured his friend that they would definitely defeat the boss of the disaster hole. Shelley was now convinced of her idea that Chrome had lied at the beginning of their meeting, and that he had also come here to defeat the boss and free the city. But the guys didn't immediately notice that they had come to the lair of another monster, which was hanging over us on its web. The monster had the abdomen of a spider and the body of a man with long claws on his hands, with which he decided to attack Chrome, but he parried the blow with his sword. Chrome reacted to the attack so quickly that it was only when he was resisting the monster that he noticed that it had human hands. However, the strength was far from human, as the enemy had enough strength to push Chrome into the wall. Shelley managed to shout at her friend, while the spider meanwhile mocked the man's suffering and intended to attack the other. Chrome stood up and looked at the new enemy, noting that he didn't expect to encounter level 42 monsters in this dungeon. Shelley told Chrome that this was one of the strongest monsters in this dungeon, besides the final boss. In addition, a friend said that you should keep your distance from Arachnid, since she has very powerful long legs, but it was necessary to fight, so Chrome rushed towards the enemy, and Shelley, noticing this, immediately advised to go from the right, because the spider was blind in her right eye. Chrome was barely hit when he decided to attack from the left, but when he decided to attack from the right, he was able to wound Arachnid along the belly. Shelley also knew that arachnids were afraid of fire, so she prepared to throw a firecracker at the enemy, hoping to catch them off guard. The firecracker exploded above Arachnid and hit her hair and arms, causing the monster to howl in pain. The adventurer knew that Arachnid should attack the human body, since it is more delicate than a spider's and more susceptible to damage. The Arachnid's hair was on fire. She hid her face and eyes in her hands, not noticing that Chrome was heading towards her, ready to plunge his sword into her. Chrome was unable to get to the neck, but managed to cut off Arachnid's arm, for which he received approval from Shelley, because now the enemy will not be able to use skills. Arachnid was wounded but not ready to retreat. However, Shelley knew about her abilities and special talents, so she was confident of victory. After some time, the body of the Arachnid, deprived of an arm and paws, all covered in wounds, lay on the ground, and the hero celebrated his victory. Chrome was sure that the difference in levels would make the fight much more difficult, but thanks to his friend's knowledge, they didn't even get wounded. In addition, Chrome was amazed that while they were exploring the dungeon, he did not notice how there were only 10 levels left until his next evolution. The hero, of course, hoped, but still did not expect that he would be able to evolve before meeting the boss. But the leveling up went faster. Chrome was still amazed at how quickly he was able to evolve from an ordinary lich to a mimic, and was getting closer and closer to a human form. The guy looked at his indicators and thought about how he would look after the new evolution, whether he would be able to be among people again. But then he remembered the mission, and turned to Shelley to clarify that judging by the map, they were already on the doorstep of the boss. Shelley confirmed this and revealed that the boss is a demonic monkey, Orbus, who has inhuman strength and skills. And while Shelley motivated herself and her friend to win, the hero himself wondered whether he would be able to defeat the boss in human form. Chrome fell to the ground and suggested that the adventurer rest before the difficult battle, gain strength and get some sleep. Shelley looked at the map and was already thinking about the happy future of the city, free from red dragons and the peaceful days of the inhabitants. At this time, a group of people from the Red Dragon Gang approached the edge of the gate to the dungeon and listened to the orders of the leader. And he told about a little adventurer who, by their mistake, got into the dungeon and she needed to be found and eliminated. The gang members listened attentively to what would happen to them if the adventurer defeated the boss of the hole and the leader lost control of the city. He also told his people that he would hang the girl's body in the square as a reminder to all residents to whom the city belongs. Chrome and Shelley sat down to look at the dungeon map, planning their route and discussing the boss, using a firecracker instead of a campfire. Chrome listened to his friend and reasoned that if they defeat the Orbas, which is the heart of the dungeon, then the monsters will stop appearing. Chrome planned to send Shelley home before he reached the boss to restore his mana to maximum, but according to her, even the knights couldn't handle him. Therefore, Chrome will have a better chance of defeating the boss if she stays with him, since she knows his weaknesses. But still, Chrome didn't want to risk her life, so he suggested that the girl tell him all the loopholes in the battle with the boss, and leave. However, the girl refused, folded the map. She said that the survivors after the battle with the boss developed a special tactic that can defeat the Orbas. Shelley knew she wasn't as strong as Chrome, so she decided she would distract the Orbas while her friend put an end to her city's suffering. Since this was the girl's own desire, Chrome saw no point in dissuading her, and Shelley mentally asked her loved ones to wait a little longer. The girl mentally swore an oath to end the existence of the disaster hole at any cost, even if it was the last day of her life. After the team had rested, they set off on their way to the boss, without encountering any more monsters along the way. Suddenly, a loud and menacing cry shook the air, and the adventurers realized that they had come to the lair of a demonic monkey. Right in front of them, the silhouette of an enemy appeared through the fog, and with each passing second it became clearer. The monster was approaching them. A large King Kong with sharp fangs and claws, and a tail in the form of a huge snake, and a level just above 50, appeared before Chrome and Shelley. Chrome immediately stepped forward and took up a position to attack, covering his friend with himself, and Shelley mentally prepared herself to be the bait. For the sake of all the people of Otfield, Shelley made the decision to put an end to the dungeon boss's existence. Chrome, however, was much more practical in his thoughts, and immediately noted the difference in levels, and remembered that in a fair fight in human form, he would not be able to defeat the boss. According to old stories, the Orbas is very fast, and its claws can kill an entire group of adventurers in one blow. For all its cool abilities, the Orbas has the most basic weakness in the form of its large front paws, on which it relies when moving. The Orbas's body is not proportional, and its lower part is significantly smaller and weaker than the upper part, so it is not worth attacking it head-on. It's best to move in a zigzag pattern, then the Orbas will lose its balance and fall, which is why Chrome moved towards the enemy before it started attacking them. Zigzagging past the monster, Chrome went behind King Kong, who didn't even have time to react, but carefully watched the man. And then Chrome moved on and the Orbas jumped up after the guy, pursuing his new victim. Although Chrome ran as he and Shelley had planned, the boy noted that King Kong would soon catch up with him. Chrome noticed that the monster swung its claws and was about to strike, and immediately remembered his friend's words about the Orbas striking strictly in a straight line. That's right. The Orba's claws hit exactly the spot where Chrome was a second ago, and the guy had already jumped back and was planning how to proceed. Chrome understood that if he didn't manage to dodge King Kong's blow, he would suffer greatly. But with such a simple trick, the hero could knock the boss out of his strength. Chrome moved away and looked at the place where the Orbas struck and began to bless the heavens that he met the knowledgeable Shelley. Without her advice, he would have died long ago. Chrome would have long ago either been cut to pieces by the powerful claws of the Orbas or crushed into a pancake by a blow from a fist. The demonic Orbas was angry that he could not touch his prey, and again, with cries of anger, he raised his claws to attack. Chrome easily dodges King Kong's claws and gets out of the way, while the monster's claws get stuck in the cave wall. Chrome decides to use the moment while the Orbas is stuck in the wall and attack the monster, or rather its weak hind legs. Chrome pushes off the ground and immediately jumps and grabs the sword with both hands, which causes more damage. After which, with all his might, he delivers a sweeping blow as planned to the lower part of the body, but only a small scratch remains on the monster. Chrome immediately noticed this and realized that the fight would be difficult, and Shelley was far from the fight and did not see, so she still hoped for a quick outcome of the fight. Chrome took a position at a distance and held his sword forward in defense, his entire brain wondering why he had only scratched the enemy. While the monster was busy with Chrome, Shelley decided to join the battle, and holding her sword forward, she ran to attack. Her job was to attack the monster from behind, again aiming for the lower part of the body to prevent the monster from moving quickly. However, what was the girl's surprise when she felt that the end of the sword seemed to hit a stone and did not injure the enemy at all. However, even if the Orbas was not wounded, it stood on its hind legs and growled, raising a cloud of dust. And then he attacked his opponents with both paws, but Shelley was quicker and managed to jump back, saving her life. But Chrome didn't expect the attack and didn't have time to increase the distance, so Orbas managed to throw the guy back and even cut him across the stomach. Chrome hit the ground when he landed, but managed to get up and even reassured Shelley by lying that he was only scratched. But in fact, regeneration was already in full swing, fusing soft tissues and skin, while Chrome hit it from his friend with his hand. Regeneration consumed a lot of mana, so Chrome decided to stick with his previous tactic and attack the monster's legs while circling around it in a zigzag pattern. There wasn't much mana left. It had to be saved for the image, so Chrome decided to keep his distance either far enough so that he wouldn't get hurt, or very close to attack. But King Kong had apparently already calculated the people's tactics and was waving his upper paws in such a way as to not let the enemy get close to him. Chrome understood that he wouldn't be able to damage the Orbas with a regular sword. The skin was too tough, and he couldn't use the mimic's claws because it would be noticeable. Chrome continued to circle around the monster and thought about how to win if partial transformation couldn't be used. Otherwise, Shelley would panic out of fear. The original plan was good, but they didn't take into account the thickness of the monster's skin, so now Chrome knew that they wouldn't be able to defeat the Orbas. As long as Shelley was here, Chrome wouldn't be able to fight at full strength, so he started thinking of a way to send her away by any means necessary. Orbas kept the girl in his sights. Now he knew that she too was a danger to him. Orbas did not allow Chrome to attack, but he did not let the girl out of his sight either. The hero understood that in such a situation, Shelley would not be able to escape. So Chrome decided to act, and as soon as he managed to get behind the monster, he threw a stone at King Kong and attracted his attention to himself. However, the monster completely ignored Chrome, and the hero decided to take a desperate step, attacking with a sword with a wide swing. Only from behind the Orbas was a snake, which Chrome struck, forcing the monster to turn towards him. There wasn't even a scratch left on the snake, but King Kong still turned towards Chrome, with a wide, sweeping blow of his claws. Now that the Orba's attention was drawn, Chrome began to run so that the monster would follow him, and thus they would be further away from Shelley. Chrome continued to run in a zigzag, which saved him from the monster's numerous blows. But most importantly, the Orbas ran after him. Chrome had already gotten used to the monster's movements, but he just couldn't find the right moment to attack. And then something unexpected happened. Orbas decided to use his special skill, the beast's poisonous breath. Chrome learned from Shelley that after exhaling, the skill covers the entire space around it with poisonous smoke, and now there was no point in running away. The radius of this skill is very large, and if the monster manages to activate it, the heroes will not be able to get close to the monster. But Shelley knew about the weak side of this skill. Shelley had prepared a special bag specifically against this skill, and, as if she had been waiting for the moment all this time, was already swinging it. While King Kong was taking a deep breath for his skill, the bag was steadily approaching his head, and Chrome, fortunately, saw it too. King Kong saw the bag a second before it exploded and the cloud of its contents scattered, and Shelley only managed to shout at Chrome to cover his nose and mouth. Since the monster was sucking in air for the skill, it inhaled almost all of the contents and was now clutching its throat in pain. The bag contained powder from poisonous mushrooms, and when it comes into contact with a living creature, it corrodes soft tissue. For a while, the Orbas would be unable to use its skill and would have poor vision. Shelley hoped to use this as a chance to attack again. Now she planned to use the Firestone, but before throwing it at King Kong, she warned Chrome and asked him to move away. But Shelley threw the stone not at the monster itself, but not far from it, which attracted the snake's attention, while the Orbas itself suffered from a sore throat. The fact is that the tail is able to find prey by focusing on the heat emanating from living creatures, and since the cracker is warm, the snake will take it for prey. Since the Orbas itself can't see anything now, the powder has gotten into its eyes, so the snake will easily fall into such a simple trap. But it is not the snake itself that takes the prey, but the Orbas, so the monster will have to bend over a lot for the small prey. Shelley hoped to use this moment to attack the monster's legs again and disable it. As soon as the Orbas bent over a possible victim, Shelley rushed towards the monster and with all her might slashed her sword across his thigh, but again a scratch appeared. Chrome watched everything from the side and understood that at this rate nothing would work out. His friend's sword was no less useless. So Chrome decided to use his sharp fangs. This way he wouldn't have to turn into a monster, and his girlfriend wouldn't notice anything. To the surprise of even Chrome himself, he managed to snatch a piece of the monster's thigh. But this attracted attention, and the hero had to flee. Only after jumping back did Chrome notice that the Orbas did not rush to attack him, but instead fell to the ground. Shelley was glad that they had finally succeeded, and were able to weaken the Orbas. But she understood that this was only part of the journey. Chrome went to a distance and watched the Orbas, realizing that they managed to put him down only thanks to his friend's knowledge. Although Orbas can no longer see or use his skill, and because of the wound on his leg he can't move, it will now be easier to defeat him, but not easy. The adventurers attacked the Orbas from both sides and began to swing their swords at his lower body. The guys were already hoping for victory, but Chrome noticed a strange evaporation from King Kong's wound and began to peer into it. Chrome observed the enemy's wound and noticed that King Kong had the same skill as him. Regeneration was healing the Orba's wound with all its might. Orbas had already begun to rise on his front paws, waiting to jump onto his hind legs, and Chrome understood that if they didn't stop him now, all their efforts would go to waste. Chrome decided to damage the monster's head, but it covered itself with its hand, and Chrome realized that the Orbas was ready to attack. Indeed, the Orbas looked out from under his hand and noticed the victim, and then clenched his fist and hit Chroma, but he managed to block it. The blow was very strong, forced Chrome to step back and even sit down. If not for his monster body, he would have died from such a blow. While Chrome was catching his breath, the Orbus finally healed the wound and stood up on his feet again, leaning on his front paws, ready to fight. But Chrome was also serious, realizing that the existence of an entire city stood behind him, and possibly the emergence of new orphans, and he was not going to die. Chrome took another run and rushed at the monster, deciding to attack with a jump and a swing of the sword at the front, and Shelley could only watch everything from the side. Since Chrome attacked head-on, the Orbus saw him and responded with its left paw. Chrome blocked the monster's attack with his sword, but was pinned to the ground by King Kong's strength and dropped to one knee. Orbus raised both his paws above his head, forming a fist to hit his victim harder, and Chrome used the moment while the monster was open to attack. Orbus didn't have time to block the blow, and Chrome pierced the monster's chest with his sword, drawing blood again and clearing the way to victory. Shelley saw Chrome defeat the monster again and was shocked because it was done solely by her friend's will. But this simple and most desired blow was enough to kill the demonic Orbus and raise Chrome's level 40 to level 47. The thought of the disaster hole boss being defeated was like a jackhammer hitting Shelley, and she fell to her knees, knowing the city's suffering was over. Chrome saw his friend fall and decided that she was unwell, so he immediately rushed to her. But Shelley immediately calmed her friend down, explaining that these were tears of happiness, because she did not believe in victory until the very end, realizing how weak her results were. While Shelley was giving all the glory to Chrome, he interrupted her and explained that it was only thanks to his friend's risk that they met in the dungeon, and from her, he learned about the monster's weaknesses. Shelley understood what her friend was saying, but she found it hard to believe that she would be credited with defeating the Orbus. While Shelley was getting herself together and calming down, Chrome thought about the future of the city without monsters and a gang of red dragons. At that moment, regeneration kicked in, and the broken arm from the Orbus's direct blow began to heal, which made Chrome happy. However, then he remembered the remaining mana, which was barely enough for transformation, and he was afraid that he would soon become a mimic. But fortunately, there was still enough mana to leave the dungeon and save face in front of Shelley. But the guy was even more pleased that there were only 3 levels left until evolution. Since evolution was dependent on the wishes of the monsters, then in the next evolution, Chrome will become even closer to a human form. Chrome thought about it and began to pray for a new image, which confused Shelley, and she was surprised, deciding that her friend was in pain from his injuries. To calm his friend down, Chrome lied about being happy about the increased level, and Shelley said that she had leveled up from level 19 to level 28. The girl imagined how surprised her friends Guido and Frank, who were in the area of level 20, would be. The girl also admitted that she feels like she doesn't deserve these glasses, because Chrome did all the main work. Chrome was embarrassed by the new portion of praise, but again reminded his friend that the victory was achieved thanks to the tactics and knowledge of the swordswoman, so the victory was shared. At first, the girl was also embarrassed, but then she pulled herself together and remembered that now they had to go upstairs, and Chrome was probably tired after the fight, so she would take on all the monsters she encountered. Shelley continued to imagine returning home and writing a report on the cleanup of the disaster hole and sending it to the capital. Chrome admitted that he was pretty tired from the fight, and the transformation was taking away his strength, so he decided to rely on his friend on the way to the exit. Her friend's trust was very important to Shelley, so upon hearing it, she immediately beamed with happiness. Suddenly the girl shouted her friend's name, rushed at him and pushed him aside, and Chrome, surprised by such behavior, did not have time to do anything. A fireball was flying towards Chrome, which Shelley took on herself, throwing her friend out of the line of fire. While Chrome was in shock over the possible death of his friend, Shelley was mocked by the people from the Red Dragon team. Chrome had already picked up Shelley in his arms, ready to run. Fortunately, the girl was weak, but conscious. But it wasn't just a couple of people from the gang who went down into the dungeon, but the entire gang, and now they were blocking the exit from the cave. While Chrome and Shelley were wondering what the Red Dragons were doing here, their leader stepped forward, admiring the strength of the adventurers. As soon as Shelley heard Gareth's familiar voice and then saw the leader of the gang, her eyes widened in fear. But Chrome was frightened by the leader's size, and he refused to believe that there was a real person in front of him. And then the guy from the church shouted, hurt that the adventurers, whom he considered weaklings, managed to get through the dungeon and defeat the Orbus. But Shelley had something to answer him. Now the existence of the gang in the city was not needed. They defeated the boss of the hole, and now they will defeat them. The guys from the gang just laughed at this statement. For them, it was the babble of stupid children. So they suggested thinking about a story about knights. One of the bandits said that the royal knights were defeated not by the monsters of the dungeon, but by people from the Red Dragon. But Shelley refused to accept this story. The king's knights could not be defeated by ordinary people. And then the girl was enlightened, told about the distribution of a false map of the dungeon, about the numerous traps set on the way to the boss. Gareth was not ready to lose influence over the city, so he ordered to kill Chrome and have fun with the girl while she was alive. But Chrome was already ready for such an order. The hero already understood that since these guys had exterminated the royal knights, it would not have been a problem for them to kill the boss, let alone them, and he clearly would not be able to fight them back in human form. Shelley was devastated by the story of the Royal Knight Squad and cried as she asked Chrome for forgiveness for involving him in this story. Shelley blamed herself so sincerely at that moment for the possible death of Chrome that it angered the hero and he wanted to defeat the dragons even more. Besides, he understood her in some ways, because selfishness was also inherent in him, but not at all a bad one, for which he should hate himself. Out of selfishness, Chrome also received such a strange ability, and because of his carelessness, Shelley had to expose herself to attack. Now Chrome was determined not only to repay the girl for saving him, but also to protect her as a friend. Such high-flown speeches were funny to the guys from the gang, so one of them immediately rushed at the hero with a swing of his sword. Chrome and one of the dragons clashed with swords. Chrome had enough strength to withstand the blow and even throw the enemy back. But the dragon decides to act dishonestly and strikes Chrome in the chest. Now the hero is seriously injured. Shelley sees her friend get hurt, so she immediately starts trying to get up. But she can't get further than all fours. Her whole body is shaking. The bandit who came to the church laughs at the heroes and their attempts to resist. Even if the heroes are stronger than them, they have no chance against the crowd. The guy also said that after the hero's death, he would take their heads to the church and show them to the children, which leaves Shelley in a state of shock and confusion. Meanwhile, the guy continues to brag to his comrades about how he will definitely tell the abbot all the details of their death. This finally breaks Shelley down mentally, and she begins to hit her forehead on the ground, asking for forgiveness from the children and the abbot. These couple of minutes of the opponent's monologue are enough for Chrome to recover a little and go back into battle, swinging the ball behind his head. But the blonde notices this and immediately rushes to protect his comrade, easily deflecting Chrome's sword. And the bandits' archers had already taken up positions and were aiming at Chrome. They also wanted to take part in the destruction of the guy. Each of the archers fired an arrow and hit Chrome. Two of them wounded the hero in the stomach, causing him to fall to the ground. And then the same dragon came up to him and asked Chrome not to die so quickly, because he wanted to watch how the monsters ate him alive. However, the dragon still swings his sword for the final blow, as the leader ordered, but meets resistance in the most unexpected form. Chrome transformed his hand to protect himself, and the blonde realized that this was his special skill, and did not retreat out of fear. After which, Chrome struck the blonde in the jaw with his transformed hand and he fell to the ground. But Shelley was confused, because a person is given only one skill for life, and Chrome had regeneration. She looked at her friend, who deftly pulled arrows out of himself with a terrible monster hand, and did not understand where it came from. And Gareth watched the fight all this time, and after Chrome's partial transformation, he became more interested in the guy. Chrome thought that he really wanted to save face in front of the one who, for the first time in his life, was kind to him. But now he just wanted to protect her. It was as if fate deliberately brought them together at the most random moments, and he was offended to meet a girl while being a monster. But now these regrets did not matter. Chrome was determined to protect his friend at any cost, so he called the bandits to him for a fight. One of the bandits understood that Chrome had been hiding his skill for a long time, so it was impossible to say what he was capable of. But not wanting to be known for his cowardice, he decided to act and, swinging his sword over his head, rushed at Chrome. But the hero was no longer in the mood to hold back. Now he had set his priorities and grabbed the mimic mask, ready to put it on. In an instant, Chrome transformed into his true form and used his sharp claws to cut one of the dragons in half. The chopped-up piece of the body fell to the ground, and a pool of blood immediately formed underneath it, and Chrome received over 500 points. The blonde realized that Chrome had not been human all this time, and was now truly scared. So much so that he froze in place and could not move. Gareth's deputy also immediately realized that transformation was not the guy's skill. The guy himself was a monster. Meanwhile, Chrome looked at his bloody hands, on which for the first time there was human blood. But the hero did not feel any remorse. The crowd of bandits who saw the mimic were scared to death. They had never seen such a monster in the dungeon before. Among the noise that was happening in the dungeon, the only one who was in real shock was Shelley, who could not believe that her friend was a monster. But Chrome didn't care about the wounds and blood on his hands anymore. All he could think about was protecting his friend. In his mimic form, Chrome had not only increased endurance and speed, but also body strength, so he boldly ran into a direct attack on the archers. The Red Dragon bandits were afraid of their leader, so they did not dare to run away, and the archers aimed at Chrome, hoping for luck. However, the skin of the mimic was extremely dense, and it was impossible to simply wound him. The arrows flew off of Chrome. Then one of the archers realized that the enemy's skin was too thick and, throwing away his bow, grabbed his sword, hoping to chop the mimic into pieces. Chrome was flying towards the crowd and was already calculating how to achieve victory with a small amount of mana, seeing only one solution. Chrome understood that there were a lot of people, but he was stronger than them. So before he reached the boss, he planned to level up a little. The first to attack the mimic was a bandit with a regular club. His attack would have been unexpected if he hadn't screamed and Chrome hadn't noticed him. However, Chrome manages to protect himself with his hands from the blow of the club, and at this time, the archer with a sword in his hand decides that the mimic is distracted, and this moment can be used for an attack. Only Chrome uses his growl to scare people around him and weaken their spirit before the fight, hoping that someone will run away in fear. But this does not happen, and then Chrome has to prove that he is much more insightful than everyone thinks, and not only attacks the guy with the club, but also the one who wanted to attack with the sword. With his first blow, Chrome disarmed one guy, and with his second paw, he cut off the head of a third, after which he headed towards the one with the club. At first, Chrome seems to deliver a normal blow to the guy's jaw, but the power of the blow is such that the mimic blows the guy's head off and grows to level 48. However, there were still a few people from the gang ahead, and Gareth himself, the mimic, still had work to do, so he stood up. Gareth and the mimic met eyes, realizing that sooner or later they would meet in a one-on-one fight. The first to notice the moment of unrest in the team was Gareth's secretary, who understood that due to fear the bandits could not concentrate on the battle. She also understood that the monster was behaving this way on purpose, intimidating the bandits even more. But there were some really desperate bandits among them who, despite the monster's strength, rushed into battle. Meanwhile, the mages close to Gareth surrounded themselves with divine protective power and thought about how to turn the situation to their advantage. While Chrome was being attacked by a crowd, the magician wanted to use the moment and shoot him, just like before, with a firebomb. However, the bandits were standing too close to the mimic, and it was impossible not to hit them when striking. The magician held back, not wanting to harm his own. And only Gareth's secretary realized that the mimic had surrounded himself with bandits on purpose, protecting himself from them with the bodies of their own comrades. At the same time, the mimic managed to hold back all the blows of his opponents and not allow himself to be injured. But when his plan was revealed, he decided to act. Chrome also noticed the mages, but he couldn't act because he was at his limit, and he had only dealt with a couple of bandits. And ahead of him was a fight with a leader who was superior to Chrome in level, so he decided not to play anymore and to act for sure. So he took out the bandit in front of him with a simple hook under the chin, and received about 400 experience points. However, the mimic was carried away by one dragon and missed a sword strike to the stomach from another, which could have cost Chrome his life if not for regeneration. The bandit began to gloat, thinking that he had defeated the monster, but Chrome, without even pulling out his sword, immediately put the enemy on his claws. Holding the bandit impaled on his claws out as a shield, Chrome looked out from behind him, examining the mages and Gareth, thinking over a plan of action. Gareth watched the enemy closely, but the mages were frightened by the monster, which had intelligence. The sorceress was scared and couldn't start attacking the enemy. This made her comrade very angry, and he started yelling at her. After which, he began to conjure a new fireball, confident that if they did nothing, the monster would definitely come for them. Chrome still hadn't let go of the bandit's claws, and using him as cover, approached Gareth and the mages, and only threw the body off his claws when it burst into flames from the fiery attack. Since the bandit was still alive before the fire attack, the mage watched as his comrade writhed in pain, but was most worried that the monster could survive after that. As proof, Chrome threw the burning body off his claws and showed himself, although wounded by a sword, but still ready to fight. Chrome and the mages looked at each other, and the latter understood that the monster would destroy him before he finished casting any spell. And the man turned out to be right. As soon as he thought about it, Chrome had already managed to approach him and cut him with his sword, raising his level to 49. Now Chrome set his sights on Gareth, who stood nearby, and he seemed confused before meeting the enemy. But no, Gareth was actually waiting for the monster. The man was interested in fighting such a smart monster. Since Chrome was very fast, to prevent him from getting too close, the dragon leader slammed his axe into the ground in front of him. The leader of the bandits was excited by the opportunity to fight a worthy opponent, which amazed his subordinates. Meanwhile, Chrome was thinking about the possibility of defeating the leader, who was most likely capable of single-handedly taking down the Orbas, and the hero was not in the best condition. Gareth was determined to test himself in a life-or-death fight and urged the hero to please him by taking him on. Without waiting for an answer from the monster, Gareth rushed at Chrome in one jump, but the mimic, relying on all his limbs, bent down to the ground very low, and the axe flew over his head. However, this was not the first time Gareth had participated in a battle, so he immediately changed the direction and position of the axe for the attack, and Chrome had to retreat back. Now Chrome was able to see that Gareth was a level 50 warrior. He was not much higher than the hero now, but his condition played its role in the battle. Chrome was tired, weak and beaten. The only way to even the odds was to deprive the leader of the red dragons of his axe. Gareth was already advancing on Chrome, and the guy decided to heal the wound on his hand, anticipating a new wound in the same area and spending his last mana on it. The head of the dragons expected a fight, so noticing that the enemy was standing still, he began to tease him. And then with his axe he again damaged Chrome's left hand. The axe entered the guy's hand and got stuck there, and Chrome hid for a moment, which confused Gareth, and he did not understand the reason. And then Chrome decided to act and jerked forward towards the enemy. Gareth was sure that the monster wanted to attack with its fangs, so he dodged. But Chrome didn't need Gareth. He needed his axe to even the odds, so the hero used his own teeth to tear the weapon out of the bandit's hands. Grasping it tighter, Chrome jerked and threw the axe to the side, disarming the bandit and surprising him with his ingenuity. And Chrome swung his claws to attack Gareth. This was his only chance to end the reign of the Red Dragons. Gareth was confused for a moment, but then decided to use his special skill, Diamond Fist, which transformed his hands. Then Gareth hit Chrome in the jaw with a sharp blow and made the mimic fly back several meters, falling onto the pinch. And then the bandit began to brag to the guy about his skill, which made him always armed, and most importantly, he could blow anyone's head off. Chrome still couldn't get up and looked from the ground at his opponent, not understanding what kind of ability Gareth had. While Chrome was assessing his chances of defeating Gareth, or even doing something to him, the bandit enjoyed how scared the monster was by his strength. Gareth remembered his family as real scum, where his mother sold herself and his father threw tantrums every day and beat his wife and son. Moreover, the father never gave a reason for the beating. He did it because he wanted to, and always forbade making even the slightest sound. He sometimes told Gareth himself that the guy was a freeloader, and that it was high time for him to start earning money for the benefit of the family. One of those days, his father grabbed Gareth by the neck and began to strangle him. His mother could not save her son, and Gareth stood on the threshold of death. But the boy wanted to live, not only for himself, but also for his mother. So it seemed to him then that the heavens themselves gave him a chance and the skill of a diamond fist. That day, Gareth killed a man, his own father. But instead of encouragement from his mother, he saw how worried she was about the dead man. It was she who first called Gareth a monster, looking at him with tears in her eyes and with disgust. Then Gareth killed his mother, gaining freedom and deciding once and for all that it was now his destiny to rule over people. Chrome was completely exhausted. There was no mana left for regeneration, and Gareth was advancing on the hero and was about to destroy him. But Chrome noticed his sword behind the bandit, which could be used, and the hero had already even figured out how. Gareth walked up to Chrome and swung his right, but the boy dodged and somersaulted under the bandit's feet, intercepting the sword. Chrome grabbed the sword and, like a cat, hid to attack, and Gareth turned to face his victim, who had escaped from under his nose. However, Gareth even liked the resistance, and the surviving bandits only began to admire their leader even more. Chrome threw his sword at Gareth, as if he wanted to pierce the bandit's chest, but he dodged, mocking the attack. However, Chrome wasn't aiming at Gareth. His target was the surviving bandit, and a few points for his death. The bandit tried to say something to the boss one last time but still died, pumping Chrome to the final level 50. Gareth now realized that the sword was meant for Jeff, not him. But he looked at the mimic and did not understand the purpose. Meanwhile, Chrome stood on the threshold of evolution and gave up his desire to become human. Now he wanted to be the one who could protect Shelley and save the city. Chrome accepted that his new power would make him even more hideous and began the process of evolution. Gareth had never seen the evolution process in monsters before, so he was surprised and didn't know what was happening to the monster. In a couple of moments, Chrome reached a new stage of shadow evolution, became taller and more powerful, acquired an additional pair of arms with eyes on them. Now, Chrome has a new ability to drive his victims crazy by appealing to their deepest fears. Seeing the monster's new form, Gareth realized that it had evolved and was furious, but still confident that he was stronger. Gareth didn't hesitate, and immediately rushed at Chrome with his fists, planning to smash the enemy's head in a couple of strong blows. But Chrome easily intercepted the opponent's hands with one pair of hands, and threw the second pair at the opponent. Holding the enemy, Chrome delivered a slashing blow to the enemy's stomach with his claws, after which he released Gareth. Gareth took a couple of steps back and couldn't move anymore. He was still alive, but he didn't have the strength to move. Chrome didn't yet understand his abilities, but he quickly realized that he had drained Gareth's mana, replenishing his reserves and starting the regeneration process. Now the hero understood what kind of skill he got with the new evolution, Magic Devourer, and was confident that he could defeat Gareth. Gareth, left without mana, was frightened by the new and unknown form of monsters and demanded that the remaining bandits attack the monster. The archer and the mage began to act, still afraid of their boss, but none of this could harm Chrome. Chrome instinctively decided to use another new skill, Phantom, which allowed him to create a hallucination and avoid any damage. The archer felt as if his arrows were accurately hitting the monster, and the mage thought that her fireballs were burning him. But then the hallucination floated like streaks of gasoline on water, acquiring a completely opposite but real picture. And then the bandits saw that all this time they had been attacking their own leader, and it was not a monster, but Gareth, who stood pierced by an arrow and beaten by fire. But the leader did not see the illusion, and did not understand why his own subordinates were attacking him. Meanwhile, Chrome approached Gareth and again inflicted cutting wounds on him with his claws. Chrome understood that although the bandits were still full of strength, he was on edge due to fear and hatred. They had no tactics, and their attacks were easy to miscalculate. To prove his point, the angry Gareth rushed at the hero in a frontal attack, swinging his fists so that even the large monster had no difficulty dodging them. And as soon as Chrome dodged all the blows, he grabbed Gareth by the hands and decided to look into the hidden corners of his memory. Gareth only managed to notice that the monster was glowing strangely, and decided that this was a sure sign of the activation of his special skill. He immediately realized that the monster specialized in mental attacks, turning the fears of its victims into a weapon against them. Chrome was ready to dive into Gareth's fears, but the bandit was sure that he didn't have any, and that he could defeat anyone. The next moment, everything around the dragon leader began to swim, and his father from the past appeared in front of him. Not understanding how the monster managed to recognize his father's appearance, but now the bandit could not be intimidated by this image, so he found the strength in himself and punched the monster in the face. Gareth stood over the monster's body and laughed, assuring him that he would not be so easily intimidated by tricks, confident that he had won again. But suddenly, everything started to blur before the bandit's eyes, and the monster lying on the ground became a blurry picture. But instead of the monster, the mother he had killed was already lying on the ground, covered in blood with her eyes rolled back in her head. Gareth felt sick. Everything around him was spinning in one direction, and the thoughts in his head were in another. The last day of the family was becoming reality again. Gareth became a little boy again, but the bandit still realized that it was an illusion, and began to shout into the void that he was not so easily fooled. Suddenly a shadow appeared in front of Gareth. It was impossible to tell who was in front of him, but the shadow spoke about his parents. A shadow hung over the boy, and like a father from the past, began to tell him what he would do to the boy for disobedience. Gareth knew it was an illusion, but he was scared like a child, and couldn't activate his skill to defend himself. But the boy still tried to defend himself and drive away the shadow, breaking the hallucination, for which Chrome immediately cut the bandit's chest in the real world. In just a couple of hits, Chrome managed to defeat the bandit and get almost 3,000 points, but only raise one level. Chrome could finally examine his new form, and was forced to admit that he had never seen such monsters before, nor such skills. The remaining bandits were now completely frightened by the death of the boss, and froze in place in fear. But Chrome had no intention of chasing after Small Fry, so he used a roar to make the bandits pick each other up out of fear and run away. The monster's influence turned out to be much more convincing. The bandits got scared, and without even helping each other, went to the exit of the dungeon. Chrome watched them go, and understood that the overcrowding of the dungeon had ceased. The knights would soon appear, and then it was a small matter, and the city would flourish. Otfield was given his freedom, and now the residents can forget about the nightmare that tormented them for many years. But suddenly Chrome remembered Shelley, that all this time he had been covering with his back, and that she had seen his new and true form. Shelley had been looking at her friend all this time, trying to find some of her friend's features in him, but his appearance was in the way, and she was scared. Chrome froze in place, not knowing what to do, but realizing that his friend was scared, and couldn't take her eyes off him out of shock. It was the same in the city when he defended the inhabitants from a sudden attack by the Cyclops. People were unable to move out of fear. And Chrome is sure that if Shelley returned to the city and learned the whole truth about Chrome from the city residents, she would not believe them and would start looking for him herself. Now the girl saw everything with her own eyes, but for Chrome it was like a sign that there was no longer a place for the hero among people. The man named Chrome is dead, and it's time to stop clinging to that name. He's just a monster now who should live like one. Chrome resigned himself to the fact that he could no longer be a friend to Shelley and a brother to Carmi, so he decided to retreat deeper into the dungeon. But Shelley seemed to think differently. because noticing her friend leaving, she made an effort and tried to stand up on trembling legs. And it was a complete surprise for Chrome when the girl caught up with him and grabbed him, hugging him tighter. Chrome looked down at her and saw how tightly his friend clung to him, not understanding what she was doing and for what purpose. Finally, the girl spoke and said that she had been watching him all this time, and only when she looked after him did she realize how lonely he had been all this time. The girl pulled away from her friend and admitted that she was afraid of him, so much so that her chest was torn apart by her heartbeat and lack of understanding of what was happening. And yet, the girl was confident in her friend. She knew that he was not bad, even if he was in such a guise. While Chrome looked at his friend with puzzlement and admiration, she now understood why her friend visited the dungeon alone. Even with her faith in goodness and people, she knew that ordinary people, having learned the truth, would probably try to kill him without hesitation. She also knew what a risk it was to come here, but he did it to save the city. So she thanked him for his work and the peace he brought to the city. Shelley promised that she would help her friend get used to the people and tell everyone that he was a good person, but she would not leave him alone. Shelley wanted to say more, but she had no strength left, so her head began to spin, her body became weak, and she began to fall to the ground. Chrome managed to catch her and prevent her from falling, and the girl began to apologize for her weakness, but eventually lost consciousness. Chrome understood that the girl was tired today. Besides, everything around was in the miasma of monsters, which clearly weakened her as a person. For Chrome's sake, Shelley spent the last of her strength to explain herself to him, and the guy wanted to thank her, but instead only wheezed like a demon. Sincere and kind Shelley, who believed in him, was a problem for the hero, because if she perceived him as a monster and not a person, it would be much easier. Chrome knew that telling people about him would get his friend into trouble, so he decided to use his new skills to correct her memories. Chrome decided to destroy all memories of himself from Shelley's memory, and then throw him closer to the city. After some time, Shelley, lying on the ground, was found by a group of guys who started calling out to her, urging her to come to consciousness. The boys told Shelley that they found her outside of town near a disaster hole, and were extremely puzzled because there were monsters roaming around everywhere. After the guys' words, an avalanche of memories from the dungeon fell on the girl, and she remembered what Chrome wanted to erase. The girl remembered her friend and began asking strangers about him, but not as a monster, but as a boy with white hair. But to her misfortune, she was alone. The guys did not see anyone else except the girl, not even a hint of a strange silhouette, and they couldn't. Chrome watched his friend from the side so as not to bring even more problems on his friend. Chrome sat on the edge of the cliff and watched the city, wondering what would happen now, because he did not dare to erase himself from his friend's memories. 2 days later, rumors about the clearing of the disaster hole spread throughout the city, and adventurers began to gather in large groups and guilds. Everyone was worried about the monsters that had already managed to penetrate the city, but some had already sent a report to the capital, and they promised to send a new ruler to them soon. This was good news for all the residents, so the adventurers decided to drink to the dark times that were far behind them, and to Shelley. Most of the city believed that Shelley had defeated the boss alone, and those few who asked found out that the true winner had disappeared. Rumors of the dungeon being cleared quickly spread throughout the city. The population would now be under control, and the remaining bandits would leave the city. Shelley could see that at this rate, Oatfield would once again become a thriving town that everyone would want to return to. Shelley was in the guild and heard praise addressed to her, and she was also sad because she did not deserve it and did not know where the friend who was worthy of it was. Shelley remembered Chrome not so much as a monster, but as a man who decided to stand up for her and the entire city. The only one who didn't celebrate with everyone else was also in the guild, and looked at the wall where there hung a portrait of the monster that the whole city was looking for. A girl approached the stranger, who hid his face under a hood, and offered to join everyone, but the stranger was against it. The guy continued to look at the leaflet, which did not escape the girl's attention, and she told him that this monster was accused of attacking a girl. While the couple were talking, Shelley noticed them. The silhouette of the stranger seemed familiar to her, so she decided to approach him. However, the stranger in the cloak continued to sit silently, not even turning around at the cry, although the girl called her name again and again. Only when the girl came close to the guy, the stranger took off his hood, and Shelley saw the face of a complete stranger. Shelley apologized for disturbing them and explained that the guy from behind looked like her friend. The stranger left the bar and then used his phantom skill to return to his real face. Crom felt sorry for deceiving his friend so brazenly, but he was grateful to her, because now he decided to meet his sister. The new stage of evolution had mainly magical skills, so there was a lot of mana, and now he could stay in the form of a human for a day. In a critical situation, Chrome hoped to use the illusion of a phantom, or the ability to get into a person's memories. Chrome believed that he now had all the abilities to see his sister, so he went to his hometown of Rockdat. At this time, in the beautiful living room of an obviously expensive house, two men were sitting and discussing how one of them had summoned an Orbas into the disaster hole. One of the interlocutors was an elderly man, Mr. Mazo, who was very interested in the interlocutor's ability to summon creatures. The young gentleman with long hair and a birthmark covering half his face was the head of the alchemical research organization Devona Claus. The old man was very interested in the alchemist's new discovery in controlling monsters, but he was even more interested in why they didn't go to the king with this proposal. The representative of the alchemists did not want to go to the king because he took everything for granted. The king saw everything as being for the good of the kingdom, but the king cares neither for his people nor for the disasters that terrorize this world. Besides, if he had come to the king with this, he would have gotten rid of him now as unnecessary. But the guy with the birthmark wanted to rule the world. But he needed help. He understood that he couldn't do anything alone. The stranger told Mr. Mazo how, in alliance, they could change this world, and how they could even become kings of the new world. This interested the old man, because instead of saving people from monsters, Lord Asher wanted to take control of him like a real devil. But the Lord didn't care what they called him. He was sure that with evil intentions he could save the world. The Lord returned to his chair and explained that controlling monsters is more difficult than it seems in words, and that a new boss may soon be born in the dungeon. However, the old man needed proof that the research was not a waste of time. The Lord knew that he would be asked for proof, so he took some documents out from under his jacket. It was a map that he laid out on the table and told of his knowledge of the plight of the trading town of Hadwin because of the neighboring one. The neighboring town of Rogdata is in better conditions, but the alchemist offered his help to get rid of this town. Moreover, everything was already prepared. The Lord only needed his consent to begin acting. Old man Mazo liked the idea of someone solving his problem soon, so he happily agreed to accept the help. At this time, in the forest near the city, Chrome was dealing with a level 16 hellhound with 3 eyes and white fur. The monster's level was low, but Chrome hoped to use it to test the skill. The monster was scared and resorted to desperate measures. He rushed at the man, and that was all that Chrome needed. As soon as the monster's head was level with Chrome, he grabbed the wolf by the head and used the magic devourer. However, the skill had no effect on the monster. The wolf deftly attacked Chrome and knocked his hand off his head. Magic devourer is a skill that helps drain mana, but it is difficult to do during combat. Chrome can't even handle a level 16 monster. The only way to use the skill is to immobilize or drown the enemy. Chrome decided to use the skill only in extreme cases, but for now, he simply tore the wolf to pieces. Chrome got a measly 3 points for the monster, but it seemed logical, because now there was a big difference between the hero and the monster. But what really worried Chrome was that in his entire life, the hero had never seen such monsters near his city or nearby in the caves. Chrome found the appearance of unseen monsters strange. Such changes are not typical for dungeons, so it was suspicious. Late in the evening, Chrome organized a shelter, dinner, and a fire for himself, deciding to rest and come to the city by dawn. Along the way, Chrome planned to pump mana out of every monster he encountered, and as soon as he got to the city, he would use transformation. Now the monster's mana is enough to transform for the whole day, and Chrome can do his business all day long and hide from the townspeople at night. There was very little left to the city, and Chrome prayed that his sister would wait for him. The guy was really looking forward to the meeting. At this time, Ash and his partner were sitting in one of the bars, having abandoned Chrome, and since then they could not find a guide for themselves. No matter how much his friend tried to calm Ash down, he continued to get angry and drink out of anger, which made him even more rowdy. Ash was worried that Chrome's sister knew they were the last ones to see him alive and was suspicious. Ash was afraid that she would find out the truth, so he wanted to ask her how close she was to the truth. But Carmi was very smart, and she told in detail how the two had recruited her brother to join the expedition as a guide. But the dungeon turned out to be too tough for them, and when they encountered a dangerous enemy, they left her brother there to die and fled. And Ash was now sure that it was she who spread the rumor about their involvement in the adventurer's death. And now, no one wants to deal with them. Ash had wound himself up so much that he could already imagine the whispers of those around him. And no matter how much his friend tried to calm him down, it didn't help. Eventually, Ash freaks out and throws his glass on the table, grabs his friend by the lapels and screams in his face what he hears. The guy assured himself that Chrome himself was to blame for his death because of his weakness. He himself made the decision to go with them into the dungeon. Ash grabbed his friend's chest more and shouted more and more about his innocence, from anger and even fear. Ash sweated very heavily, but what angered and irritated Ash most was the girl's gaze, which was full of contempt that he did not deserve. Ash didn't want to let the girl ruin his career and name with dirty gossip. He was clearly up to something. A little girl with silver hair got entangled in one of the dungeons and admired the monster she saw there. Fenrir was the boss of the dungeon and was several stories tall. But 100 days ago, he was just a tiny thing. Fenrir rushed at the stranger, wanting to have a snack on her. But she assured the monster that she was now his mistress. And as proof, she took a glass ball out of her pocket, noticing which Fenrir froze, as if waiting for a command. The animal immediately calmed down and became an obedient little dog. And then, as if recognizing its new owner, howled at the moon. The girl decided to test the dog's obedience and gave the first simple command to sit, as if she didn't believe that this would happen. Fenrir did not understand where the man had power over him from, but something inside him told him to obey, and he sat down as ordered. Fenrir did not follow the girl at the first command, because he was scared. But she calmed him down, explaining that she had not yet received an order to kill him. Instead, she was told to take the monster to the city of Rockdot, where he could eat his fill of human flesh. Chrome finally entered his hometown and walked along the streets, looking around at how much everything had changed since he left. Chrome walked, carefully studying everything around him, and at the same time very worried before the first meeting with his sister after his first death. And the hero was so suspicious at that moment that the local alcoholic considered him strange and decided to remember his face for himself. As usual, his brother found his sister late at night, practicing her knowledge. She was learning a new spell. With the help of ice magic, Carmea learned transmutation, creating animals or ghouls from ice. The hero stood by the window and, out of habit, watched his sister practice and noted from her face that she was again criticizing herself and was dissatisfied with the result. For Chrome, this was a great opportunity to finally think about how to tell his sister everything and whether it was necessary to do it. Being a simple guy, Chrome thought about just coming and telling everything as it is, and then leaving. But then he looked at her again and realized that all that mattered to him was that she was alive and well, and that she didn't need to know about all his problems. Carmea had been working on her practice for a long time and had already managed to create a small flock of birds from living ice sculptures. The girl was quite tired, her head was spinning and her stomach was growling. But she only took a minute's rest and sat down to practice again. This did not escape the brother's attention. He did not understand why she was sitting longer than usual and wasting her body. Finally, Chrome noticed the change as Carmea stood up from the table and headed off to the far corner. Chrome noticed the girl take a sword from the dresser, and when he looked closer, he saw that it was the sword he had left with his sister with a message. The girl pressed her cheek to the blade and cried quietly, confident that her brother was still in the dungeon. She asked him to wait for her. When Chrome realized that the girl had also been missing her brother all this time and looking for him, he abruptly opened the window he was standing by and announced himself. The girl screamed in surprise, but grabbed the sword by the hilt and immediately pointed it at the source of the unexpected screams. Strangely, Carmea recognized the stranger with gray hair and a stain on half his face as her brother, but she was still scared. Chrome entered the house, but before Carmea could interrogate her brother, she yelled at him for all the time she spent looking for him and for how worried she was about him. Carmea was very worried about her brother, who was low level and went off to God knows where with some suspicious guys. As soon as the girl spoke out, she realized that this was not what she wanted to say. But Chrome already realized that he had offended his sister and began to apologize. He grabbed his sister by the shoulders and admitted that he understood her concern and how she had looked for him, and that he was truly sorry for causing so much trouble. Chrome was so sincere at that moment, and Carmea was already tired of arguing, so she just threw herself into her brother's arms and began to cry on his chest. Finally, Carmea was next to her brother, and Chrome had achieved his goal. Now he was just enjoying the moment of happiness of their little family. The brother and sister sat down at the table. Chrome did not yet know what words to choose, but asked his sister to listen to him carefully. Chrome didn't tell his sister about his new stage in life. He only explained that he would soon have to leave, and Carmea didn't like that. The girl tried to find out where her brother was going after he returned, and even tried to pressure him, but Chrome did not confess. Chrome made the decision not to say anything the moment she hugged him, because he was afraid to think that she would turn away from him out of fear. Chrome had to evolve into a monster this time out of necessity, but Chrome was hoping for the next one to definitely get closer to human form. And since a new evolution is needed, you need to increase your level and level up. You need to go to the dungeon again and kill the boss. Before his death, Chrome was sure that he would not become an adventurer, and he should give up this dream. But the death of his parents changed everything. At his parents' grave, his younger sister cried so desperately that his brotherly heart could not hold back, and the boy promised that he would rid the world of monsters. Even though the skill turned Chrome into a monster, he didn't become one. The hero felt like something in between, so he was sure that he had to stop the spread of monsters. Chrome stood up from the table, apologized to his sister, and explained that it was time for him to become stronger, so he was leaving. Chrome confidently walked towards the door and walked out, not stopping when his sister called him, so the girl followed him. No matter how much Carmea shouted at her brother, demanded that he tell her where and why he was going, she received no answer, and her brother practically disappeared through the door. The girl followed her brother, but when she lost sight of him again, she fell to the ground from helplessness and began to cry again, accusing her brother of disobedience. Her brother had just disappeared, and Carmea was again tormented by thoughts about her brother's safety, and again she was crying hysterically from worry about him. Chrome used the phantom skill to be invisible, but he was there and saw his sister crying. But now he had said everything that needed to be said and he had to go. As soon as Chrome had moved a sufficient distance away, he regained his visibility, but he was so lost in thought about his sister that he did not notice the person he was meeting. The oncoming man also didn't see where he was going, so it's not surprising that they ran into Chrome, but the latter immediately started apologizing. But Ash, on the contrary, immediately began to swear and blame the other, wiping the bruised spot and not yet seeing who he had collided with. As soon as Ash raised his head after the collision, Chrome immediately recognized his former employer, the man who had thrown him into the imp cave. Chrome couldn't believe his eyes, and in his surprise he asked the man he met out loud if he was Ash. Ash didn't recognize the person he met until the very end, but the voice reminded him of the hated Chrome, because of whom he was now so unpopular in the city. At this time, the upper windows of the tower of the southern fort of the city of Rockdat were lit up, notifying everyone that there was a guard there who was watching everything. Only the local security guard fell asleep that evening and was awakened by an alarm signal, so much so that from surprise his head flew off the palm on which he had fallen asleep. The guard had been working at this place for a long time, but this was the first time he had heard such a loud sound from the demonic sensor. Something was approaching the city, so the guard went to the window to look at the horizon, and immediately noticed an approaching catastrophe. A flock of monsters was approaching the city walls, and they were already so close to the city wall that they could be seen. A horde of demons was approaching the city, and among them was that same Fernir, who was summoned by the silver-haired girl. The guard was frightened by what was happening, and planned to contact the guild, but did not notice how the silver-haired one appeared behind him. A fight broke out between the guard and the girl, and so far the man has successfully attacked, remaining uninjured. But the girl had already been hit more than once, but she got up again only to be pierced by a pike again. The guard had done this more than once, first stabbing and then throwing the girl's body off the weapon, and already knew that she would get up again. Coughing up blood, the girl only grabbed her braid tighter, and then, wiping the blood from her lips with her sleeve, began to mock the guard again. Kevin Kiraz, a level 24 security guard, is already sweating profusely. For some time now, he has been trying to kill the intruder who is preventing him from sending a warning. The girl looked crazy, as if she enjoyed each new wound, but the guard thought that she was also superior to him in level. The guy tried again to convince the girl to let him through, explaining that a horde of monsters was approaching, and that he needed to be warned about it. Kevin was scared of what was approaching the city, and the one who got up so easily after each injury, that the capillaries in her eyes burst from the strain. And what was the guy's surprise when the girl in front of him, with a slight smile, admitted that she knew about monsters and danger. She also said that it was she who brought the monsters to the borders of the city, which the guard found hard to believe since monsters cannot be controlled. The stranger raised her scythe above herself, preparing to attack, and finally admitted that she was interested in whether these monsters would be able to get their fill of the locals. The guard didn't understand what was happening, but he decided to pull himself together and concentrate, and also find the enemy's weak spot, because even immortals have one. Kevin took it upon himself to protect the city's inhabitants, so he swung his pike again and attacked his opponent. Kevin took a large swing with his pike from behind his head, making his blow easy to calculate, and the girl quickly jumped out of the way of the attack. As soon as the guard realized that his weapon had hit the empty stone floor, he realized that the enemy would come from behind and turned around. But it was too late. The girl cut Kevin's entire back with her scythe, not giving him a chance to survive. However, a moment before his death, Kevin realized that the girl was strong from the start, but did not attack on purpose from the very beginning. Kevin's body lay face down on the floor with his spine severed. The pike had rolled away from him, and the killer stood over the body. It turns out that the girl wanted to play. She got bored while she was leading the monsters to the city, so she decided to unwind, and now she would like to talk. The silver-haired girl approached the guy and sat down opposite his head. He was still conscious, and she wanted to know if there were any in the city who could repel the attack of the monsters. Kevin immediately realized that the girl had deliberately deprived him of the ability to move independently, and was now going to torture him. but he intended to remain silent. But the stranger was not one of the patient ones. As soon as she received a portion of sarcasm instead of an answer, she plunged the blade of her scythe into his wound. With such a blow, the girl finally shattered the guard's spine and he howled in pain about the desire to live, which is what she needed. The girl immediately sat down and began to use her healing skill, which caused the guard's spine to begin to heal. Now the guard knew why he had failed to kill the girl, even though he had put her on a pike so many times. And the stranger, with a grin, demanded an answer to her question. But Kevin wasn't stupid. He knew the girl wouldn't save his life once she found out, so he wasn't going to give up. Time after time, the girl crushed his spine and then healed it. But the guard refused to give out secret information. She offered to save his life, even to heal him until he was completely recovered. But every time she heard a refusal. And Kevin, every time he came to his senses, tried to grab the floor more firmly and push himself forward in order to finally report about the monsters. The stranger was already tired of such stubbornness and loyalty to her cause. She exhaled and decided what to do, because the torture turned out to be more boring than she expected. The stranger walked past Kevin's body and left the guard to die, while she headed towards the exit of the tower. The guard Kevin himself loved his city so much that even with the last beats of his heart, he prayed for someone to protect his city. Meanwhile, the same people were sorting things out in an alley in the southern part of the city. Ash couldn't believe that Chrome was alive and hadn't been eaten. Ash pointed his finger at Chrome and assured him that he should be dead, and it was highly abnormal that he was standing in front of him now. But Chrome didn't feel any anger, hatred, or fear towards Ash. Rather, he was tired of listening to his old friend. Chrome even thought about always using the phantom skill and being invisible within the city to avoid such encounters. While Ash was spouting nonsense, his brain suddenly generated the idea that the low-level guy who should have died survived thanks to a skill. But at the same time, the idea seemed stupid to Ash, because even if the guy were to be resurrected, he would have to live in the dungeon for several days. It was troublesome for Chrome to stay in the city, so he thought about how to quickly finish the dialogue and go about his business. However, at the last moment, Gon noticed that his interlocutor looked extremely strange, sickly, with sunken cheeks, circles under his eyes, and was swaying from side to side. Ash was shaking, trembling, and staggering, his bloodshot eyes like a madman staring at Chrome, his hands reaching for his sword. Chrome managed to see Ash take his sword out of its sheath and throw it aside, and then he screamed and called on his old friend to think about what he was doing. But Ash couldn't be stopped. Somehow he guessed that Chrome had been reborn as a monster and was now screaming about it. The only thing the guy was wrong about was his desire to take revenge on him, which Chrome didn't have. And the hero tried to explain this. But nothing could be explained to Ash, whose mind was clouded and held on to a manic idea of revenge. Chrome knew that if he didn't calm Ash down, people would come running to his noise and everyone would pay attention to him. Since the hero already understood that Ash was not himself and would have to defend himself, he took out his sword, which only increased Ash's hysteria. Chrome armed himself, but the enemy's hysteria was already beginning to irritate him considerably, especially when he heard for the 10th time that he would be sent to hell. With insults and shouts that no one could defeat him, Ash rushed at Chrome, raising his sword above his head. Chrome easily repelled the attacks of his old acquaintance. Even morally he came to terms with it, since Ash always had a difficult character. Chrome remembered how often Ash insulted him, used him as a punching bag, taking out his bad mood from failures on him. Now this fool was no match for Chrome. All his sword swings, which he took for full-fledged attacks, were like toothpick swings for the hero. Although the hero easily repelled the enemy's attacks, he was not prepared to meet him. The last thing he wanted was to meet him in his hometown. Although Chrome was actively fighting back, he managed to think about how to calm Ash down and had not yet found an answer. And Ash couldn't understand how a low-level boy, even though he had been reborn as a monster, moved so dexterously and quickly. Chrome decided to buy himself a moment of peace, and in the heat of battle turned his sword hilt forward, and then slammed it into Ash's gut. Ash fell to his knees in pain and couldn't breathe. Looking askance at his opponent, he continued to wonder where the weakling got his strength from. Chrome thought that he was stronger than the boy and could remain in human form, and he also hoped that after the blow he would calm down. However, the madman laughed, and then slowly stood up and prepared for battle again. He intended to kill Chrome that evening. Ash is completely confused by his own conspiracy theories, but especially by the fact that the dead man whose death he personally witnessed was resurrected. Ash decided to use his skill and covered his sword in fire, after which he threw the sword behind his head again and rushed into a frontal attack. Ash attacks with a backhand, and Chrome again falls to the ground on all fours like a cat and avoids the attack. And then Chrome deftly leans on his right hand and trips Ash, knocking his leg and the guy off balance. Ash immediately falls to the ground, and the sword flies out of his hands, and Chrome gets back on his feet with a deft jump. Ash immediately began to look around and search for his sword, and as soon as he found it, he crawled towards it on all fours. The hero tried once again to convey to the enemy that, despite the past, he was not going to cause trouble for Ash. But Ash's madness went too far. He pointed his finger at Chrome and shouted that he was a liar, that the monster was just looking for a moment to attack. And then the moment comes. The city shakes from the roar. The southern border of the city has fallen, and a flock of monsters has broken through it. The army of guards of this wall formed a line and put their pikes forward, but the people were frightened due to the number and size of the monsters. Chrome heard the howl of the wolf monsters that he already knew. Although he didn't understand where it came from so close to the city, the hero froze and began to listen. He realized that the monsters had entered the city, just like 10 years ago, which Chrome feared and wanted to avoid. Ash also heard screams and howls. He also realized that monsters were in the city, but this was impossible not only because of the guards, but also because of the lack of a dungeon with overcrowding. But Ash interpreted the situation in his own way, and decided that it was Chrome who brought the monsters after him. Chrome wanted to run to find out what was going on as soon as possible, so he decided to use his new skills. However, in the alley where they were with Ash, a stranger with silver hair suddenly appeared. Imagine Chrome's surprise when Ash rushed towards her, considering her an adventurer, and detained her. But the girl was not in the mood to talk. She was not interested in the problems of those around her, and she demanded that they give her way. But the madman began to tell her his idea that Chrome was a monster, and that it was he who brought monsters to the city. Chrome was not only embarrassed by this behavior, but also by the attention it was drawing to his person, so he tried to blame it all on drinking. Suddenly the girl spoke in a cold tone, accusing Ash of being a fool and a human who couldn't lead monsters. And while Ash was trying to explain to the girl that Chrome needed to be killed, the hero himself looked closely at the girl and felt her strange aura, awakening the monster in him. Chrome didn't understand what was going on, but he didn't hesitate to call Ash to move away from the girl. But he wasn't in the mood to listen to the monster. While Ash was yelling at Chrome, he turned his back to the girl, and she decided to take advantage of the moment and prepared her scythe to attack. And again the girl, with one deft movement, ripped open the back of another man from Rockdat. Ash was still alive, and therefore, trembling with pain and powerlessness, he began to slowly crawl away from his possible killer. And the girl, reveling in her power, again told about her involvement with the monsters in the city, which the guys could not believe. The girl did not want to linger any longer, because she had an order from the owner to take his creation to the city center. Saying that she had to hurry, the stranger raised her scythe to finish off the victim and moved towards Esch. But Chrome managed to repel the scythe's attack in time and protect the wounded madman, and that was enough to stop the stranger. Silverhair couldn't understand why the guy who was accused and who they tried to kill was now defending his tormentor. Chrome did not allow himself to relax and held a defensive position, and explained that he could not stand aside when his help was needed. Besides, Chrome was willing to join the fight if it meant he would get information about the monsters coming to the city. Now Chrome had taken up an attack position and was demanding answers to questions about who she was and how she had managed to bring the monsters. However, the stranger was in a hurry and had no time to deal with another boy, so before the fight, she promised that she would finish everything quickly. The stranger was the first to rush into battle, jumping and bringing her scythe down on Chrome, who withstood the blow, but realized that he was inferior in level to the girl. Ash couldn't get up from the ground because of his wound, so he watched everything from the side, not understanding why Chrome didn't abandon him and protect him. Somewhere inside, Ash knew that he was responsible for Chrome's death, but he tried to convince himself with the same phrase hundreds of times that it wasn't so. Ash remembered hearing rumors about the living dead beings who were brought back to life by the mana of monsters that was infused into them, and the rumors said that such dead people were driven by bitterness and resentment, that they were tormented in life, and this made Ash even more confused about why Chrome was protecting him. At this time, Chrome tried to take the blow, but the girl was very fast and strong, and because of the two-handed weapon it was impossible to get close to her. The hero had a hard time fighting, but he managed to take the blow, however. The fight was harder than with the leader of the Red Dragons, Gareth. The girl's level was only slightly higher than Chrome's, but her weapon skills were higher, and the hero didn't remember there being such adventurers in his city. The girl skillfully struck from above, repeatedly lowering the blade of the scythe into the ground, and Chrome managed to avoid meeting the scythe only for an instant. Then Chrome decides to take a desperate step, and as soon as the girl lands after her scythe, the guy attacks with a backhand sword. To her surprise, Chrome managed to wound the girl, and although she jumped to the side, due to the wound she could not stand up to her full height. The hero understood that the wound was not deep, but it would distract her for a while, and Chrome hoped to have time to take Ash to a safe place and go after the monsters. But the stranger still found the strength to stand up, and then put her hand to the wound and began to heal herself. Chrome was at first surprised that the girl got up so quickly after being wounded, and then his surprise knew no end because he saw her using holy magic. Seeing how surprised her opponent was by her abilities, the stranger looked at him insolently and sarcastically remarked that the fun was just beginning. Chrome realized that with such skill he would not be able to hurt the stranger and prepared to defend himself, just in time, because a scythe was already flying at him. Chrome gritted his teeth tighter and barely kept up with the stranger's attacks, all the while thinking that he needed to hurry to the southern borders of the city. Chrome knew that he could only give a worthy response in the form of a monster, but he knew that this would attract even more attention. And Chrome didn't know where it came from, but his nature told him that illusion skills wouldn't work on the stranger. There was no time to think. Chrome decided to quickly find out the girl's weaknesses, and to do this he needed to use the same tactics as with Gareth. Chrome intended to find out the girl's true fears and then defeat her with one blow, so he charged his sword with the Devourer skill. The stranger immediately understood what skill the enemy was using and easily blocked the sword, warning that the guy would not have enough strength to hit her. Chrome understood that the girl was talking about his inner fear, because of which he was afraid to approach her. And the girl just continued to mock the hero and how he stupidly wastes mana on a skill without using it. Chrome understood this too, but he couldn't yet control his body, which was shaking and wanted to run away. The hero collected his thoughts and decided to attack, but he was not collected, and it was easy for the girl to knock the sword out of Chrome's hands. Raising her scythe over Chrome, the girl acknowledged her opponent's strength and abilities, but he was weak in comparison. It was then that Chrome decided to use the skill, turning his hand into a monster's paw. And even the fact that the stranger noticed it didn't change anything. Chrome hoped that Ash wouldn't notice the partial transformation from behind, and that he would finally learn the girl's weaknesses. And again, the sword became bait, so that Chrome could approach the enemy and tear him apart with his claws. Chrome barely had time to hear the girl scream in pain before he found himself in her head the next moment. This time everything was different. There were no memories from the past, no images or anything else. Chrome was surrounded by a completely white world, where there was no light, no darkness, no horizon, which is why the hero at first did not believe what had happened. Chrome walked and thought why he saw memories of Gareth and even monsters, but not of the stranger, because that doesn't happen. But suddenly he gets lucky, and in the distance he notices the figure of a girl sitting on her knees and bending over something. Only when he got closer did he hear her trying to use her healing skill over and over again. The girl grumbled at herself, not understanding why she was able to help, because she wanted to so much. And then Chrome looked over her shoulder. And it would have been better if Chrome hadn't looked, because then he wouldn't have seen that. Already being a little girl, the stranger was cutting up different animals into pieces, and in the girl's hands was something made of 2 rat heads and 1 body, which she had sewn together and was trying to revive. The idea of Frankenstein in such a young head scared Chrome, but the lack of other memories scared him even more. Suddenly, the girl raised her head and looked straight at Chrome, as if this was not a memory from the past, but a scene in real time. And then Chrome was thrown out of the girl's head, and here he was in the real world, standing on all fours and suffering from a headache. Chrome saw only one and apparently the only memory, the sight of which made him turn inside out. Meanwhile, the girl had already come to her senses and raised her scythe over the head of the unarmed Chrome, but he managed to notice her. Luckily, the sword was at hand and Chrome quickly grabbed it, but it did not help him, and the girl cut his chest. Chrome was thrown back by the blow and was unable to stay on his feet, and fell and lost consciousness. And the girl, on the contrary, was as cheerful and happy as ever. Throwing her braid over her shoulder, she was ready to continue their game. The stranger attacked Chrome so hard that the guy was thrown back, and the girl began to mock him, surprised at how quickly the enemy fell. Chrome tried all his skills, and realized that he would not be able to lure the girl into an illusion, and that he could not turn into a monster. Although all the people hid in their houses from the monsters, Ash was still conscious and watched the fight, and his screams could create even more chaos. Ash actually watched the fight, and saw Chrome fighting with what he thought was his last strength, and began to fear that the girl would finish off the hero. Ash still hated Chrome, but he understood that as soon as the girl got rid of Chrome, she would come for him. And after all, the hero seemed to be trying to protect him. Still not sure what to think about Chrome, Ash decides to help him as much as he can for now, and grabs a rock lying nearby, then covers it with fire and swings. Chrome, meanwhile, rose to one knee, holding out his sword for defense, and began to think about what to do if he couldn't use his true form. Chrome refused to give up and let the monsters destroy his city again, so he charged again without a plan, but the girl knocked his sword away. At the moment when the girl swung her scythe at the guy again, and was ready to lower her weapon on him, a burning stone suddenly flew at her. It was surprising to Chrome that Ash, even though he was wounded, decided to help him. And he, barely remaining conscious, was glad that he managed to hit the offender. The stranger was no less surprised than Chrome that her first victim managed to survive, and was even trying to harm her. But she decided to quickly fix this, and in an instant she was next to Ash, jumping and stabbing him in the arm with which he attacked her. Chrome was surprised not only that Ash was still trying to fight, but also how fast the girl actually was and had been playing with him the whole time. Now Chrome realized that he no longer had a choice. Only in the body of a monster could he try to get on the same level with her and fight. The girl had already raised her scythe over Ash once more, to finish the guy off for sure, and the magician began to beg not to be killed, that he still wanted to live. But the stranger didn't have time to lower her weapon, feeling that something was happening behind her, and managed to turn around to look. Realizing that she might be attacked by Chrome, she immediately used her scythe to defend herself, only for the weapon to be stopped by the claws of an unfamiliar monster. A huge monster with horns, which was several heads bigger than her, easily held her braid with his claws, and the girl did not know what to do with it. In just an instant, the girl compared the mask on Chrome's head and the monster's face, and realized that the daredevil had transformed. The girl hesitated because of her thoughts, and therefore did not have time to notice how the monster slightly pushed her braid aside with his left hand, and then swung his claws with his right. The girl managed to jump back only by inertia from the push and avoid the claws, but Chrome had already swung his second pair of paws and cut the girl in the chest area. But the stranger turned out to be tenacious, and quickly jumped away from Chrome, taking up a safe distance. The girl moved like Chrome on the animal, landing on all her limbs, and she herself did not take her eyes off the enemy, because now he was stronger than her. Ash also noticed the monster and began to examine it, not associating the image with Chrome, but realizing that the monster came from the very abyss. The stranger stood up and prepared for battle, her whole being shaking with fear, realizing that the enemy was not only strong, but also smart like people. She looked at the monster and tried to remember something similar from her master's stories, but she couldn't. But since the girl needed to get rid of the monster in order to fulfill her master's plan, she decided to resort to her holy magic immortality. In addition, the girl planned to enjoy the chaos of the monster devouring the inhabitants. But all her fun was ruined, and she wanted revenge. The girl's technique not only extends to healing wounds, but also accelerates her life energy, making her literally invulnerable. But the stranger admitted that for her immortality and power, she pays with her life, whatever that means. Having healed all her wounds and put additional strength into her body, the girl rushed into the attack again, offering the monster to play with death again. With a deft jump, she flew up to the monster and lowered her scythe onto him, aiming for his chest. But Chrome covered himself with his hand, and the weapon got stuck in it. As soon as the scythe got stuck in the dense raft of the monster, Chrome intercepted the weapon at the base of the blade and wheezed that the girl was caught. The girl was least of all concerned now about what the monster was saying, how scared she was, that the monster had deliberately exposed himself to the blow in order to get closer. But the silver-haired girl realized this too late, and again found herself within the reach of Chrome's blow, which cut the girl open again. And again, the stranger had to run away, leaving her weapon in the hands of the enemy in order to heal the wounds she received. Chrome managed to tear half of the girl's face, her eye rolled back from the blow, but holy immortality returned everything to its original state. While the wounds were healing, the girl began to develop a strategy for an attack, but Chrome did not let her finish, plunging her own scythe into her chest. The girl again decided to increase the distance and jumped back, pulling out her braid, only now Chrome was equal to her in speed. In an instant, Chrome caught up with the girl and appeared in front of her. And then he plunged his scythe into her again and struck her in the face with his fist. In the monster's body, Chrome had much greater strength and speed, so it was no surprise that the girl crashed into the ground, destroying the stone beneath her. But as if having received more pain, the girl became stronger and stood up on her feet faster, removing the scythe from herself and admiring the strength of her opponent. Chrome realized that magical skills wouldn't work against the girl. All that was left was to use brute force, especially since the hero was in a hurry. The hero was in a hurry to get to the southern gate, so he kept on delivering sweeping blows at the stranger, and the silver-haired one eagerly dodged or fought back with her scythe, confident that thanks to her skill she was immortal, at least as long as she had mana. But the girl wanted to find out from the monster why he was protecting a man who would obviously be happy to kill him, especially since she caught them doing it. Chrome chose to remain silent, realizing that the stranger was trying to get him angry in this way, and continued to attack. At one point he struck and broke her neck, twisting her head back, but a moment later the girl looked at the hero as if nothing had happened. And again the hero went on the attack, swinging his claws again and again, and at some point he was lucky, he managed to cut off her arm. After which the girl hesitated in surprise and missed another decisive blow, with which Chrome dismembered the girl in half, separating the top and bottom. The girl's lower body fell to her knees, and the upper body flew to the side, after which Chrome decided that he could now go to the southern border. But as soon as Chrome turned around and took a couple of steps away, the stranger appeared behind him, grabbed hold of him, and was about to sink her teeth into his neck. But the hero managed to do it in time and, throwing his hand behind his back, grabbed his opponent by the neck, not allowing her to bite his throat. And then he threw the girl over himself onto the ground with such force that the roadstone crunched under her, and with it part of her bones. But even so, the girl continued to laugh at Chrome, calling him pathetic for not understanding his uniqueness and potential. But Chrome wasn't interested in listening to the girl's nonsense, especially when he himself hadn't decided who he was. But he was determined to finish the fight as soon as possible. Chrome put his paw on the girl's head, and she no longer had the strength to resist, and she only crucified the guy, that he could not be more human. And then she raised her head and looked into his eyes, saying that Chrome would forever remain a monster, which was the last straw for the hero. Chrome grabbed the girl by the head more tightly and slammed her face into the stone with all his might, crushing the opponent's head, thereby increasing his level to 53. For himself, Chrome decided that he would no longer chase after anyone's approval, and would only do what he considered right. With these thoughts and a calm heart, Chrome looked towards the southern wall and decided to head there. And Ash was conscious and listening the whole time. So it's not surprising that by the end of the fight, he finally realized that the monster in front of him was Chrome. As Ash began his monologue about the monster again, Chrome turned around and walked towards the boy, deciding to put an end to this inconvenience. Ash only had time to exhale and squeak, and Chrome's hand was already lying on his head with an open eye, beginning to penetrate the man's memories. Deep in his subconscious, Ash wandered around in his world, but froze at the sight of large eyes hanging over him and studying him. Ash started screaming in fear, his whole being screaming for help and demanding to be saved. But outside he was sleeping and Chrome calmly laid him down on the ground. Chrome changed back to his human form and was glad for the silence that had finally come, in which he wondered what to do with Ash, who would now be a problem. Chrome decided to change the guy's memories. Besides, he felt sorry for the guy, who looked very tired and scared. He was clearly feeling bad. In any case, this was Chrome's last meeting with Ash, as the hero only wanted to see his sister in the city. Chrome returned to a key moment in their story, when the boys threw Chrome to be eaten by cannibalistic demons, after realizing they couldn't cope. Chrome revealed himself and dispersed the demons with his roar, which scared the guys, who had never seen such monsters before, and they ran away. After that, the guys got out of the dungeon and went into a bar, where they discussed how they got out. But Ash was sure that there was someone else with them. Then Chrome went further, into the memory where they met when Ash called out to him looking for a guide in the dungeon. Back then, Ash seemed like a kind guy to Chrome, who respected every adventurer regardless of their strength and abilities, confident that it was hard work. It was then that Ash's friend told him that all of his relatives had also died due to overcrowding in the dungeon, and that's why he was considered a reliable guy. Chrome decides to alter Ash's memories at this point, and creates a story where the hero turned down the guide job, and that's where they parted ways. After that, Ash turned to leave, and when he turned around again to see who was wishing him a good day, he did not recognize the guy in front of him. With the memories corrected, Ash began to slowly come to his senses, making his way through his clouded vision and mind. Meanwhile, Chrome had lifted Ash onto himself and was trying to find a passerby with whom he could leave him and set off on his journey. Chrome found one such kind person and gave Ash to him, lying that he found him in such a state. Only at the end he asked him to take care of him. Ash noticed that the first savior was leaving him, and tried to talk to him. But Chrome only briefly told him about the attack on the boy by a certain girl. The magician remembered how the inadequate woman attacked him, and now began to question the savior about who he was and where he was from. Chrome did not answer the questions, but only modestly rejoiced to himself for his friend, that now he would be freed from the burden of guilt and would no longer bother his sister. Chrome was about to leave when, unexpectedly for everyone, Ash fell to his knees and bowed his head in a low bow before Chrome. The hero was so surprised that he couldn't even say a word, and the passerby tried to find out what was wrong with the guy, or what he wanted. Ash himself, his eyes wide with surprise and unable to lift them from the ground, did not understand what was happening to his body and why it was asking for forgiveness. It was only after Ash said that his body wasn't listening to him that Chrome realized that despite the erased memories, the boy's sense of guilt was too great. Chrome turned to leave, and finally advised the guys to hide, since there were now maddened, hungry monsters roaming the city. After which Chrome said goodbye to Ash forever and left, and Ash sat on his knees until the very end and begged for forgiveness, but already looking after him. There was chaos at the southern border. A pack of hellhounds of at least level 18 attacked, and the local guards were barely holding the line. Any one of the pack could easily knock down a guard and bite him to death. But few were able to fight back, let alone destroy the monster. The head of the guard ordered his subordinates to urgently evacuate women and children to the northern part of the city, since there were too many monsters. Fenrir had not taken part in the plundering of the city all this time, only tearing down the main wall so that the pack could pass, and howling, calling more monsters. Fenrir was so huge that he could be seen above the rooftops of houses for many kilometers ahead, and everyone understood that all his children of the dungeon had come after him. And the head of the guard understood that no matter what the dungeon boss ordered, the pack would obey without question, which meant that soon only ruins would remain of the city. But when the pack gathered for a general attack, the head of the guard did not lose his head, and gathered all his will into a fist, and then rushed into battle. Suddenly a young man appeared in front of him, holding his sword out in front of him to attack, and in a calm tone demanded that he step back, which surprised the man. The guard tried to convince what he thought was an ordinary boy to run, since it was clearly impossible to deal with a pack of hounds alone. The pack of monsters didn't care who would be their first meal, so they rushed at Chrome, but the hero cut the monsters down in a couple of blows with his blade. As soon as the chopped-up carcasses of the hounds fell on the road, Chrome received a measly 6 and 8 experience points. Now low-level monsters were of no use to him, and while the head of the guard admired Chrome, wondering what kind of guy he was, another part of the pack of hellhounds lined up in front of Chrome. Chrome shielded the guard from the pack of monsters, and despite their terrifying number, without even blinking an eye, called for a fight. Chrome continued to cut through the monsters with his blade, and all that could be heard was the monsters whining and falling to the ground in piles. Chrome chopped again and again, clearing out the pack, so it's not surprising that at some point he didn't notice how he was attacked from behind. But the hero deftly used the hilt of his sword, and struck the hellhound in the forehead, and when it began to fall, he cut it in half with one swing of the blade. Having received pitiful experience points, Chrome used regeneration and healed his shoulder, and having spent mana on it, decided to replenish it. Chrome used the Magic Devourer skill on his sword and rushed into battle, absorbing mana from the bodies of the hellish monsters. Thanks to regeneration and the Magic Devourer, Chrome no longer had any problems with mana and health, and the enemies themselves are of a fairly low level. Chrome does not need to leave his human form. The guards watched how skillfully Chrome dealt with the monsters and began to loudly praise him, assuring him that with his help, they would be able to protect the city. Among the crowd of guards was Ash's comrade, who recognized the common hero as Chrome. But remembering that he was definitely dead, he began to doubt. Chrome continued to circle the wolves and chop them down, sucking out their mana, while Ash's comrade watched him and noted how strong he had become. Although they had worked little before, and it was unusual to see him with white hair, he was distinguished by a cruelty in his eyes that had not been there before. There were no more hellhounds left, and the guards approached Chrome with words of gratitude, because now the city was clean, and there was no need to evacuate the citizens. But no one expected that Fenrir, the boss of the dungeon, would enter the picture and loom over the people and the city as a new danger. The people froze in fear, and Fenrir looked at the ground, which was strewn with the bodies of his pack and their blood. Out of anger, Fenrir only waved his tail and destroyed the neighboring building, pieces of which fell on the ground and the guards. The head of the guards of another squad ordered everyone to gather in one place, motivating everyone to help Chrome defeat the dungeon boss. But Chrome interrupted the guard again with a calm tone and a command to leave, all the while not taking his eyes off Fenrir. The guard tried to convince Chrome, assuring him that the boss was much stronger than ordinary hounds and he couldn't do without help. But the hero was already ready for battle. Unfortunately, the guards did not know that the huge and frightening monster in front of them was several levels inferior to the boy, and weaker than his previous enemies. Without thinking, Chrome grabbed the sword more tightly and rushed into the attack, swinging from the bottom up, which drew the enemy's first blood. Fenrir immediately jumped back and landed on all fours, pressing himself to the ground in anticipation of another attack, which made his fur stand on end. And Chrome also prepared for battle, grabbing the sword and calling the monster to him, but most importantly, destroying the enemy with his gaze. Even though Fenrir was wounded and bleeding, he liked the enemy's spirit and was eager to fight. The guards looked at the guy with even greater admiration now, and could not find the words to describe how much the boy delighted and surprised them. Meanwhile, Chrome had moved to the roof of the house for the sake of battle, and each of the opponents was looking at each other, checking the time for an attack. Fenrir was badly wounded. His breathing became uneven and heavy. Even standing required no small amount of effort from him. Meanwhile, Chrome had healed his wounds and was ready to enter the battle again, aiming where to strike this time. Chrome pushed off the roof of the house and soared high above Fenrir, inflicting several new wounds on him along the way. Chrome flew over the monster and landed behind it, intending not to use magic skills as he relied on his high level. And just as Chrome was preparing to attack the monster again, it whined and ran away from him, trying to escape outside the city to its dungeon. The guards watched what was happening and were extremely surprised by the monster's behavior, but quickly realized that they needed to catch up with and detain the monster. To Fenrir's surprise, huge chains appeared out of nowhere and began to wrap around his paws, preventing him from running or even moving. Slowly, the chains crawled over the monster's body and enveloped it entirely, binding and holding the dungeon boss. The monster felt something approaching him. Darkness covered everything around him. Chrome approached the monster from behind, but in his true shadow form, indicating that he was using the Devourer skill. Fenrir growled at him in fear, only for the real Chrome to be in human form and attack him with a sword in the real world. Chrome quickly began to hack at the dungeon boss, and a moment later, he fell to the ground, giving the hero experience points for another level. And the guards could not hide their joy, and shouted praise to Chrome, who was still looking at Fenrir. The hero was not at all interested in the approval of others. He was simply glad that he was able to protect the city and its inhabitants. But Chrome was worried about the stranger's words about how it was she who brought monsters to the city, and he kept replaying them in his head over and over again. The guards and adventurers wanted to meet the hero, but he advised everyone to go to the city to destroy the remaining monsters. Since Chrome was right and many monsters had entered the city, the guards and adventurers decided to listen and gathered to save the rest of the inhabitants. And while the rest fled in a crowd to the city, Chrome went back to where he came from, to the southern wall, especially since he did not want any honors. Chrome didn't notice how he ran past Ash's comrade, who had looked at him in every detail while he was fighting, and was now thinking about the difference with the past. Although the boys were similar in appearance, their personalities were different. Besides, Ash still hadn't recovered from Chrome's death, and he didn't want to feed his madness. Chrome returned to the scene of the fight with the stranger, and saw how crazy it all looked, and began to look closely at her face. Chrome initially understood that something was wrong with the girl, because part of the hero seemed to demand to absorb her entirely. Chrome had never experienced such a feeling before, so it scared him, and in search of the reason, he decided to search the girl's body. After rummaging through the pockets and linings of his cloak, Chrome discovered a strange glass ball containing a thick scarlet liquid. As soon as Chrome opened the sphere and began to observe it, a strange thirst appeared inside him again. Chrome didn't understand what it was, but he was sure that with its help, this girl was able to bring monsters to the city. Chrome decided to take the sphere in his hand and examine it in more detail. Finding nothing new, the hero decided that this had no place in the city and needed to be taken outside. While some of the guards and adventurers were searching the city for monsters, others were collecting the wounded and trying to help them. Among the volunteers, Carme was running around looking for a tent with bandages to help the newly arrived wounded. But the girl was not thinking about other people's problems or what was happening in the city, but about whether everything was okay with her brother. The girl was carrying bandages, but she heard a group of adventurers loudly talking about a white-haired guy who single-handedly defeated the boss Fenrir. The boy was recognized as a hero of the city of Rokdat, and Carme immediately remembered her brother's promise at their parents' grave to protect the city, and realized that he was okay. After some time, the holy knights we already knew came out to report, and the girl did not understand why the other commanders were not happy with their report. Captain Elamp tried to explain to her that they had been tasked with finding the Red Reaper of Otfield, but they had been unable to find any traces. The girl muttered under her breath, wondering how dangerous the Red Reaper was, and meanwhile the captain began to grumble at her for being too curious. Although Captain Elamp had already gotten used to his assistant and was not surprised by her interest, he even more considered that she deserved to know the truth. The commander began his story with an incident 100 years ago, when someone brought a whole horde of monsters into the capital. The culprit was the only successor of Viscount Eros, who was recognized by everyone by his red hair and the birthmark that covered his entire face. But Mill refused to believe that someone could live for more than 100 years, and that entire squads could be sent after him. Then the captain recalls the story of 300 years ago, when a magician was executed in the capital, who also brought monsters to the city, completely destroying it. Then the magician was executed for his deed, and since too many years had passed since that day, no one remembered his name. Here is just a striking factor. The description of external distinctive features coincides with long, fiery hair and a birthmark on the entire face. The commander tried to explain that God gives people strength to protect the earth from monsters, but Mill did not understand why Elamp was saying this. The scriptures say that immediately after this, natural disasters, including forest fires, occurred on Earth for a whole week. Through the story, the commander wanted to remind us of the seventh day, when the bloody monster appeared, bringing evil into this world. Mill didn't quite understand, but the commander hinted that the Viscount's successor was that monster, but that this should be kept quiet so as not to create chaos among the people. The commander was not sure of this, but the number of monsters was increasing, and scientists predicted that in a couple of centuries humanity would come to an end. And it is their duty as holy knights to find this man, and learn the truth about the monsters, and prevent the demise of the human race. A couple of days later, Meizu read the news about the city of Rokdata, and the attack on it by a pack of monsters, which made him very happy. Only the rampage of the monsters was stopped, thanks to the adventurers. But now the old man believed in the powers of Lord Asher. Now the old man was completely willing to sponsor the Lord's alchemical research, and was ready to conquer the whole world with him. But Lord Asher did not like the news at all, and slamming his fist on the table in anger, he plunged into his thoughts. Old man Mizo was surprised by the behavior of the always sweet and charming Lord Asher, so he decided to find out if everything was okay. Asher was going over his order in his head to find the strongest boss that was capable of destroying the city, and he also sent his best student Gerda. Asher went through all the possible scenarios about the student's betrayal, about someone defeating her, but he couldn't believe it. However, they had to come to terms with the idea that since the plan had failed, Greta was dead, and the sphere with the Lord's blood had ended up with the knights from the capital. Asher didn't understand what was happening. He grabbed his hair and couldn't believe that someone could defeat Gerda, that someone could defeat immortality. Asher began to mumble to himself that he would have to start all over again and destroy this world completely. As if he had become himself again, the charming lord stood up and thanked Meizo for supporting his project. But he had some problems. He explained that a man had appeared who had killed his subordinate, and that was why the adventurers had managed to save the city. And now he had to find this obstacle. The Lord asked the old man for help in this matter as well, and the obstacle that the Lord was looking for was sitting on the rocks outside the city, studying the sphere that he had found.